There is no distraction that we can't overcome through forethought. I call myself a behavioral designer, meaning I help companies design behavior using consumer psychology to build healthy habits in people's lives. When we know what to do, why don't we just do it? We're lacking the ability to avoid distraction. That the root cause of why we become distracted is because we feel these internal triggers that we seek to escape. When you're feeling lonely, check Facebook. When you're uncertain, you Google. When you're bored, check the news, check sports scores, whatever. If we don't deal with this fact that we are trying to escape an uncomfortable sensation when we become distracted, we're always going to be distracted by one thing or another. We are slaves now to the urgent at the sacrifice of the important. If you don't plan your day, something or someone is going to plan it for you. So many of us are reacting all day long. Where's the time for reflection, a time to think, time to focus? How do we plan our futures? We can't. We need that in our day. So that has to be planned for as well. A gift of our species that we can do better than any other animal on the face of the earth is that we can see the future with greater fidelity. We can plan today to make sure we don't get distracted tomorrow. This can be our identity. This can be who we are, and we should proudly declare that we are the kind of people who do what we say we're going to do. We are indistractable.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
I've been a fan of Nir Eyal ever since he wrote his first book called Hooked, which really taught us how Silicon Valley gets us addicted to our mobile devices. He had some really interesting things about a trigger, an action, and an investment that told us a lot how the human brain works. But now he's back with his brand new book called INDISTRACTABLE, and it shows us how we can manage our own mind. And he goes into some interesting IP about how all of us have distraction and traction. Traction is what's pulling you forward to what you want to do. And with those two pieces, we also have internal and external triggers. One of the things that really fascinated me was we all have internal triggers that force us to get distracted. And those aren't always emails or beeps on our phone. Sometimes we actually get ourselves distracted because we don't want to be focused on what we're doing. He also said that you can hardwire in external pieces, something called time boxing, where you force yourself to do certain things, and all sorts of other ways that we can really have a focused mind and do what we want to do in our life. I think this is a powerful episode. Nir is a really smart guy who spent years honing all of this information. Seriously, pay attention, because this episode could change the course of your life. It could put you on a path of traction where you're actually getting the things you want done in your life, or you could go back to your current level of everything around you distracting you and not allowing you to live your purpose or find your mission in life. So sit back and enjoy this incredible episode with Nir Eyal. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Nir Eyal, the American author, lecturer, and investor. You were named the prophet of habit-forming technology by the MIT Tech Review, and your work has been featured in TechCrunch, the Harvard Business Review, and Psychology Today. Your first book, the New York Times bestselling Hooked, reveals the psychology that builds habit-forming products. And your new book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, explores the psychology driving us to distraction. And while solving the problem is not as simple as disowning our devices, Nir, welcome to London Real.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great having you here. First of all, what's it like coming to this city of London? Is it a place you have a lot of experience with? What's it feel like? Is it different from New York City where you live now or the West Coast where you've been for many years?
It's awesome. I'm such a big fan of London. It's so great to be here. London is one of my very favorite cities in the world. I love the vibe. Many of the same reasons why I love living in New York. I love living in London. But there's a lot here that I'm a little jealous of.
Like what?
It's just fantastic. I think there's a fantastic amount of diversity. There's a really vibrant intellectual scene. There's a lot of civic organizations that get together. I just got back from the RSA, and there's a lot of thinkers here. There's a lot of people who want to improve, a lot of people with growth mindsets that very welcoming to someone like myself who has some new ideas that maybe are a bit unconventional.
Yeah, it's not the same city it was 30 years ago, which was fog and bad food. Now it's like really international, really diverse. Like you said, growth mindset. A lot of people are really open to these interesting new ideas. So you must be getting a nice reception.
It's been great.
Good. Look, I want to talk about a bunch of things today, including touching on Hooked and then getting into this incredible new book. But when I was reading this new book, I was reminded of my life in 1993, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about it. Actually, it was 1989, and I want to talk to you about distractions because I was kind of front row seat of watching distractions make or break certain people. And this happened to me when I moved from San Diego to MIT when I was 18 years old to study engineering. And I went there and I was surrounded with some of the smartest people in the world. And I moved into a fraternity house where 50 guys were living in this place, average age 20, max age 22. And I had so many distractions, and yet, half a click down the road, I had the greatest technology institute in the world where I was there to work for 4 years, and that was going to change the course of my life. And Nir, I saw guys come in that could not handle the distraction. And it crushed me. I saw a guy 6 months later, he was back home as a bike messenger. And this is a guy that
got into MIT.
Got into MIT. I saw some guys go on to become doctors, start some very famous companies, and other guys went back home and worked at restaurants because they couldn't handle the distraction. And again, in the fraternity house, there was always someone that wanted to play pool, play foosball. There was beer to drink. There were parties. There were girls coming over.
And this was 93.
Yeah, well, this is actually, I got there in 89.
89, okay, so this was before Facebook. This was before the iPhone. This was before all the things that people think are distracting us, as if distraction is something new. I think you have a great point here. Distraction is definitely nothing new. It's been a struggle that people have tried to overcome since the times of Plato. Plato literally talked about krasia, this tendency that we all have to do things against our better interest 2,500 years ago. And so imagine how much more distracting the world is today, where we have these devices that a lot of people complain are so distracting to us.
Yeah, so I can't wait to get into this stuff. I mean, for me, I ended up finding my own IP to get me through there in 4 years, and it usually involved leaving the fraternity, and I would go to this 24-hour-a-day library called Hayden. Anybody from MIT watching will know that place, and I would be in the basement there till 4 in the morning, and I would come up with these mind games to keep me focused. And during finals week, oh my God, I mean, I used to like black out the windows of my room. I used to put like things on the wall, like saying like, how bad do you want it? And like calling myself weak and like all this stuff. And it was a mental game. And so I always tell people, the success I had at MIT wasn't because I was the smartest. I actually wasn't one of the smartest people there, but I found a way to not be distracted.
Absolutely. I mean, this is why I call being indistractable the skill of the century. That the power to do whatever it is you say you're going to do, to live with personal integrity, is the skill of the century. I mean, that is a superpower in my book.
Yeah, no, that's so powerful, and that's why I think this is really important. Also, some other things really stuck out to me, and we will get into this later, but you said in the book and also in interviews, all behavior is the desire to escape discomfort. And so time management becomes pain management.
Right.
And honestly, Nir, I had to think about that for a day before it really hit me. But it's weird because people expected maybe the second book to be a lot about kind of like digital devices and products. And I know there's carryover, but you're talking about basic human functionality.
Right.
It's been around for thousands of years.
Right. And this is, I think, a really important concept for everyone to understand, that when we try and answer Plato's question of why do we do things against our better judgment, I mean, this is an age-old question. When we know what to do, why don't we just do it? And particularly in today's age, where we have the world's information at our fingertips, we don't have the excuse of not knowing what to do anymore. Who doesn't know basically how to lose weight? Okay, maybe the specifics, but we basically know that chocolate cake is not as healthy as a healthy salad. Who doesn't know that? Who doesn't know that if you want to have better relationships with people, you have to be fully present with them? Who doesn't know that if you want to do better at your job, you have to do the work, especially the hard stuff that other people don't want to do? We know these things. So there's no excuse anymore to say, well, I just didn't know how. Google is right there for anyone to use. What we're lacking is the ability to follow through. We're lacking the ability to avoid distraction. Getting ahead in life is not just about doing the right things. It's about avoiding not doing the wrong things. And that's what becoming indistractable is all about. It's about whatever it is that you say is important to you in your life, how do you make sure you do those things? So to start answering these questions, I'm a big definitions guy. I think words are very, very important. So let's start with defining what we mean by distraction. So the best way to understand what distraction is to understand what it is not. So the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction, if you look at the etymology of the word, the opposite of distraction is traction. They both come from the same Latin root, meaning trahare, which means to pull. So, and they both end in the same 6 letters. Traction and distraction both end in A-C-T-I-O-N. That spells action. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent. The opposite of traction is distraction, anything that pulls you away from something that you didn't plan to do, or that you plan to do, something that you are not doing with intent. Okay. So this is super important for 2 reasons. One, I think it frees us from this moral hierarchy that what you do with your time, that's frivolous. But what I do with my time, that's okay, right? So me watching football, that's all right, but you playing Candy Crush, not okay. I argue, no, anything that you want to do with intent, that is according to your values, is fine. They're both pastimes, there's nothing wrong with them. And you see this a lot with the younger generations, that older folks think that younger kids playing video games or whatever they're doing somehow is frivolous and silly. No, I think if you plan your time and you do what you say you're going to do, anything can be traction. And just like anything can become traction if you plan for it, anything can become distraction as well. So for example, I work with a lot of folks who have this problem of when they get to work, they say they're going to do something. They say they're going to work on that big project. They're going to stop procrastinating. They're going to do that thing that they've been planning to do right after they check email, right after they scroll that Slack channel, right after they do that quick thing that they have to talk with a colleague real quick. And so 30, 45 minutes later, they still haven't started to do the thing they plan to do.
Right, and the other thing is technically work.
Exactly.
But it's not the thing they need to do.
I call it pseudo work.
Right, it is pseudo work.
I kind of need to check email, right? I kind of need to do that stuff. But if I plan to do something else at that time, it is just as much of a distraction. So anything can become a distraction as well. And the reason this is so pernicious is that we are slaves now to the urgent at the sacrifice of the important when we do that. And in today's age where technology is so pervasive and so persuasive, I mean, it is designed to be persuasive, and we want it to be persuasive. We want products to be engaging. Then it's easier than ever to get distracted.
Thanks to your first book.
Partially thanks to my first book.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So we've got traction, we've got distraction.
Right.
Now, back to your question around these triggers, we have 2 things that move us towards traction and distraction. We have what's called an external trigger, or an internal trigger. External trigger is what kind of everybody blames on distraction, right? It's the pings, the dings, the rings, anything in your environment that prompts you towards traction or distraction. Now, they're not inherently bad. These tools are not somehow evil. If a notification on your phone says, hey, it's time to wake up and hit the gym, or it's time to go to that meeting, or it's time to do the thing you plan to do, it's moving you towards traction. But if you get a notification on your phone while you're with somebody that you plan to spend time with, in my case, it was my daughter. One day I got this notification while I'm spending time with my daughter and I'm checking my phone as opposed to being fully present with her. That was moving me towards distraction. So those are the external triggers, but it turns out, even though we love to blame those things, we think that that is the root cause of the problem. In fact, the psychology of distraction goes much, much deeper. That most distraction, it turns out, is not spurred by the external triggers at all. Most distraction does not start outside of us, but rather starts from within. That the root cause of why we become distracted is because we feel these internal triggers, these uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. So if we're going to answer Plato's question of why do we get distracted, why do we do things against our better judgment, we have to start one layer deeper with first principles of why do we do anything? What's the nature of human motivation? And when you think about it, most people will tell you some version of carrots and sticks, that it's about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. This is Freud's pleasure principle.
Yeah.
But neurologically speaking, that's not true. That in fact, we do not do things in the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. That neurologically speaking, we only do things for one reason, and that is to avoid discomfort. Physiologically, we know this is true. If you go outside and it's cold, that's not comfortable. What do? You put on a coat. And when you go back inside, now it's too hot, that's not comfortable, you take it off. If you're hungry, you feel hunger pangs, you eat. And when you're stuffed, oh, that doesn't feel good, you stop eating. So physiologically, we feel this all the time. This is called the homeostatic response. The same rules apply with psychological sensations, not just with physiological sensations. So when you're feeling lonely, check Facebook. When you're uncertain, you Google. When you're bored, check the news, check sports scores, check Reddit, Pinterest, whatever. All of these things cater to these uncomfortable sensations. So that means if all human behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort, that means, as you said, time management is pain management. And so this is why it is the most important first step, that with all the ways you can, life hack yourself and all of the guru's technique du jour, fundamentally, if we don't deal with this fact that we are trying to escape an uncomfortable sensation when we become distracted, if we don't understand it and learn new methods to cope with that discomfort, we're always going to be distracted by one thing or another.
And you talk about a study in your book, I think, where they put men and women in a room with nothing to do and some electrodes, and a large percentage of them ended up shocking themselves to pass the time than just be alone, right? Can you talk about that study and what does that tell us?
Yeah, so this was a study done by Timothy Wilson where they put people in a room and they said there's nothing in this room to do except for we're going to put a band on your arm and it's going to be connected to a button that you can press on. This button will give you a painful electrical shock. Something like 60% of men and about 20% of women administer the shock. That we are so uncomfortable doing nothing that we just want to feel something. We need some kind of sensation. And this is by design. I think one of the things that bothers me, by some self-help experts, is that they kind of preach this gospel that somehow if you're not happy all the time, if you're not satisfied with your life, somehow something's wrong with you. And it turns out that evolutionarily speaking, nothing could be further from the truth. That our species is designed to be perpetually perturbed. Right? We have this instinct of feeling bored to prod us to go do something, to go search, to find better resources, to improve our lot in life. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That we can harness that, right? This is the same impulse that helps us develop life-changing medicine, helps us invent new things, helps us shoot for the moon. It comes from that desire for more. So I don't think the answer to all of our problems is to not want, to not crave, to not desire. I think the answer is to channel these internal triggers towards traction rather than distraction.
Right. And most of us go toward the distraction these days, especially with the availability of these digital devices. Because, like you said, a lot of times people are checking your Facebook feed and your Instagram because you're anxious or depressed or all of these things that are the discomfort, like you said, that causes you to go there to just take you out of that state.
That's right, because we form these habits by trying to, by learning what provides relief. I mean, if there's one thing that our brain is incredibly good at, is pattern matching. So if the brain feels discomfort and then finds something that can relieve that discomfort, that's what it forms the habit around. We actually know that the reason we even have brains, the reason animals evolved brains, was for movements. If you look at some of the most simple organisms, freshwater snails, for example, have a 2-neuron brain system. And one brain, one neuron tells them whether food is available, and the other cell tells them if they're hungry. That's all their brain does all day. And why does it do that? To tell them, keep moving and find food if you are hungry, and if you're hungry, eat it, and if you're not, don't eat it. And that's why we have motion. That's why we have movement in the first place, is because the brain spurs us through these uncomfortable emotional states. So how do we relate that to our own lives? We need to understand that if we are to fight distraction, if we are to be the kind of people who do what we say we're going to do, we only really have two choices. We can either fix the source of the discomfort in our life, whatever it is that's causing us this pain, or we need tactics to cope with the discomfort that we can't alleviate on our own. For example, part of being human is that part of the human condition is that you can't solve every problem in your life. You can't even, I would argue, you can't even keep yourself from feeling those feelings. What you can do is change how you react to your emotions. And so that's the really important part, is either fixing the source of the problem where you can, or learning tactics to cope with that discomfort in a healthier manner.
Okay, and fixing the source of the problem is maybe your next book, maybe about stoicism and meaning of life and purpose.
I would argue those are ways to cope with the problem.
Okay.
I don't agree with this idea that you can meditate all your problems away, or that you can even rationalize all your problems away. Sometimes you need to get up off your butt and fix the problem. Whether it's trouble at home, whether it's a workplace culture. There's a whole section in the book about dysfunctional workplace cultures and how we know that there are a confluence of two factors in the workplace that are leading to causal relationship with anxiety and depression disorder in the workplace. So if I said, what type of work environment leads to depression and anxiety disorder? When I started studying this stuff, I thought, okay, well, it's probably a depressing job, a sad job, right? It's working in a mortuary, or I don't know, having to be a veterinarian and put dogs to sleep. That must be very sad. But it turns out what you do has nothing to do with the rate of depression and anxiety. It's all about the environment you do it in. And we know that a certain type of work environment with the confluence of two factors, work environments that ask employees to have high expectations coupled with low control. That is the type of work environment that is literally driving us crazy. High expectations plus low control. By the way, if people have high expectations plus high control, they're fine. They like their jobs. It's when we have low control that we start having these problems with our emotional well-being and psychological well-being.
So autonomy is really important.
Very important. And what's interesting is that when people do not feel a sense of autonomy, what do? They grasp for it any way they can, sending more emails, calling superfluous meetings. And that just makes the problem worse for everyone. So that's the kind of problem that, look, if you don't fix the source of the problem, a crappy workplace culture, you are still going to get distracted. You sometimes have to fix that problem. But again, we can't fix every one of our problems. Sometimes we have to learn tactics to cope with it. And so that's where I would recommend some of these other techniques that I describe in the book, from acceptance and commitment therapy, other techniques to learn tactics to cope with that, those internal triggers in a healthier way.
One of yours is the 10-minute rule.
Right.
Can you describe that? What does that mean?
So I can't take credit for it. It's been around for a long time in acceptance and commitment therapy. But the idea of the 10-minute rule is, let me back up for a second. So one of the things that people do that doesn't work is strict abstinence. Now, strict abstinence is when you tell yourself, I am not going to do that thing, right? Just say no, like Nancy Reagan told us in the 1980s. And it turns out that strict abstinence for many behaviors backfires, particularly behaviors that are very difficult to avoid completely. So, if you're a recovering drug addict, you might be able to abstain completely from a substance you abused. But how do you abstain from food if you're on a diet? We have to eat. How do you abstain from technology these days? I mean, it's imperative to do our jobs. We can't just say, stop using email for 30 days, you'll lose your job, you'll get fired. So for those type of potential distractions, we don't want to just abstain, and just to dive into, because I think the research is so interesting, when we do abstain, when we tell ourselves, no, absolutely not, it's almost like pulling on a rubber band. That when you pull on a rubber band and you stretch it, and you let go, it doesn't just go back to where you started, it ricochets even further. And that's what happens when we employ strict abstinence. We tell ourselves, don't do it. Okay, fine, I'll give in. And that sensation of relieving the discomfort of telling yourself not to is itself pleasurable. This is a big reason why smokers get addicted to cigarettes. Smokers, when they are mindful about the experience of smoking, they actually rate it as not pleasurable. It's stinky, it's not very pleasurable. There's nothing inherently pleasurable. Nicotine does make you feel a certain way, but many smokers don't actually report it makes them feel good, it just makes them feel something. What gets them to keep smoking is not only the physiological effects of the nicotine, what more so gets them addicted is telling themselves, don't do it. Finally, I smoke, and now I'm relieved of the discomfort of having to tell myself, don't do it. So strict abstinence oftentimes backfires.
Yeah, this is white knuckling it. If anyone's tried to do it, it's first of all massively distracting, a lot of brain power, and then it rarely works.
Right, because when we finally do give in, we are wiring our neural circuitry to expect, when I feel the discomfort of not wanting something, giving in makes it feel so pleasurable, not because the behavior itself is pleasurable, but because it relieves us of the discomfort of telling ourselves no. So instead of you telling yourself no, what you can do is employ a technique like this 10-minute rule, where here's how it works. You tell yourself that you can give in to any distraction, whether that distraction is checking email when you want to work on a big project, whether that you're tempted to Google something or eat that piece of chocolate cake you don't want to have. You can give in to that distraction in 10 minutes. 10 minutes of doing what psychologists call surfing the urge. When it comes to these uncomfortable emotional states, we know that emotions don't last forever. In the moment, we think they will last forever. That's how the brain spurs us to do something about it, right? It spurs us to action by making us think, I don't want to feel this way anymore. But logically, rationally, when we think about it, emotions are like waves. They crest and they subside. So we can surf these urges like a surfer riding a wave. So for 10 minutes, what I oftentimes do, I'll take out my phone, I'll say, set a timer for 10 minutes, I'll put my phone down. And my job for those 10 minutes is to simply reflect on that sensation and talk to myself the way I would talk to a good friend, with self-compassion. So what many people do when they tell themselves no, when they try and not get distracted, they fit into two buckets, the blamers or the shamers. The blamers say, oh, it's my phone that got me distracted. It's Facebook, it's YouTube, it's Slacks. That thing got me distracted. The shamers, this is the category I used to fall into, say there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm not cut out for this job. I'm lazy. I have a short attention span. There's something wrong with me, right? And we shame ourselves. And of course, that's not helpful either, because where does this shame spiral lead? It causes more internal triggers, which makes us even more likely to seek a distraction to escape that uncomfortable emotional state.
Yeah.
So how do you diffuse it? You don't become contemptuous, you become curious. So for 10 minutes, your job is to reflect on that sensation, to feel that sensation with curiosity rather than contempt, or to get back to the task at hand. And 9 times out of 10, by just setting that 10-minute rule and saying, I can give into that distraction, I can have that chocolate cake, I can go check my email or Google or whatever it is that I am tempted to do, but in 10 minutes. It's an incredibly effective and simple technique.
And a good example for people would be, say you're in the middle of doing some work, or you're maybe with your children and you need to be with them and you want to check the email, go have some cake, have a shot of vodka, I don't know what you want to do.
Yeah.
And in the past, you might just do it and it's like, okay, let's spend 10 minutes, but let's not blame and shame. I'm a shamer as well. I just tear into myself.
A lot of high performers are. It's that whole imposter complex and perfectionism. This stuff goes all hand in hand.
Yeah, and so you kind of ride it and you talk to it as if it was a friend. Like say, okay, Brian, well look, you could go do that and then you could do it, but then you might not feel good afterwards. But it's interesting you brought that up and maybe we should kind of explore that. But in the meantime, we could also just get back to the work. Yeah. Do you still want to check your email? Is it that important? Why are you checking your email?
Yeah, so we can explore it and tell ourselves a different story. We can reimagine the story. So we don't want to really negotiate with that saboteur in our head. What we want to do is to change the story. So for example, I used to get terrible stage fright. And when I would go on stage, I would get stressed out and I would say, I'm nervous and my pits are sweaty and people are gonna see it, and what if I mess up on stage? And I would look for all the bad stuff and shame myself. Did I prepare enough? What if I don't say the right things? Instead, I changed the narrative to say, what am I feeling right now? Let me get curious about that. I'm feeling stress. And I changed the narrative into, why am I feeling stressed? Is it because I didn't prepare my old story, which I knew I had? It was changing that narrative to say, wait a minute, my heart is pumping right now because my brain needs more oxygen so that I can perform up to the task. So now when I'm writing, and writing is hard work, I've written 2 books, it's never gotten any easier. It's really hard work, and I'm constantly tempted to just Google something, or let me just read that book for a minute that might have some good research in it, or I bet something's happening on email, let me check that. Instead, what I tell myself is, look, getting better at something is hard. Just like I would tell to a good friend. If a friend was a writer and having difficulty writing, I would say, look, the reason it's boring, the reason you're anxious, the reason this is hard work is that things that are difficult take effort and sometimes feel boring, feel hard. And so this is a sign that you're getting better at this task. So you're reimagining the narrative.
Right, and that helps you then get up on stage and be with it, yeah.
Right.
I'm actually just reading a book recently by a guy named Ant Middleton here in the UK, and he's a former special forces guy, and he just went to Mount Everest, and it's called The Fear Bubble. And so when he gets scared of something and has that reaction, he starts asking himself and saying, okay, is it appropriate to what's happening? Are you nervous about something that's not going to happen for another 2 hours? Well, in that case, what's the point? And then again, if you are nervous about it, and he was having this discussion with his boy about to go in for his first Thai boxing fight at 8 years old, and he's like, okay, why are you feeling nervous? Why is your stomach hurting? It's because the blood is going to other parts of your body. That's good. We want it to be that way. Yeah. We want you to be heightened response, and this is actually a good thing and a natural thing. And he walked it through his 8-year-old boy until he was like, okay, I get it. And it was still real, but he was able to kind of process it.
Right. And this actually touches on one of the 3 techniques on how we master these internal triggers. There are three big ways that I describe in this first section. It's reimagining the trigger, reimagining the task, and reimagining the temperament. And reimagining the temperament is really interesting. This is all about how we have these fixed beliefs about the kind of person we are or our nature. And it turns out that so many of these beliefs are self-defeating. One of the myths I talk about in the book is this idea of ego depletion. And this idea of ego depletion says, I mean, that was a psychological term for it, but it turns out that many people kind of believe this. Inherently, we have this understanding that when you spend a lot of willpower, you run out of it. Right? So for me, I would come home from work after a hard day and I'd say, I'm spent, I don't have any more self-control, give me that pint of Ben & Jerry's and I'm gonna sit and watch Netflix for 3 hours, right? Because I'm spent, can you blame me? And that belief, turns out, did have some justification from a few studies that showed that actually for some people, they did run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. And there were some other studies that showed that there was this magical effect that if you drank a sugary beverage, they gave people lemonade sweetened with sugar, that somehow their willpower was replenished. And so they dove into these studies and they wanted to figure out what was really going on. Turns out the studies don't replicate, that when other psychologists tried to do these studies, that they found that ego depletion is not real, except for the work of Carol Dweck at Stanford, who you know. She did these amazing studies that found that actually ego depletion is occurring, does happen. There's one group of people who do experience ego depletion and that their willpower does run out like gas in a gas tank. Those people were the people who believed in ego depletion. Those are the only people who exhibited this trait. And so we see this in all sorts of aspects, right? This narrative that we're telling ourselves that we have a short attention span, that we have an addictive personality, now some people really do have the pathology of addiction. I don't mean to gloss that over. Some people have conditions like obsessive compulsive disorder or whatever else. Very, very small percentage of the population, but the amount of people who think they are addicted right. or use that as an excuse is much, much greater. And so this narrative that I'm really scared of that we hear these days, that technology is hijacking your brain, that it's addicting everyone. Not only is it scientifically not true, because let's think about it for a minute. Lots of things are potentially addictive and don't addict everyone, right? A lot of us have a glass of wine with dinner. We're not all alcoholics.
Yeah, even drugs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, millions of women every year are given fentanyl when they have a baby via C-section. Fentanyl, the most addictive substance we know of. Tiny percentage of those women ever get addicted to the substance. And so why do we treat technology as somehow this special class of products? It's silly. Some people do become addicted to technology because any analgesic, anything that solves pain, is potentially addictive. What's really harmful is when we start telling ourselves this narrative, that this technology is hijacking our brains, that what am I gonna do? My kids are crazy because these video games are doing it to them. What does this lead to? It leads to learned helplessness. This condition where we think, well, there's nothing we can do, why even try? And now it becomes true that these technologies are actually persuading us in ways we don't want because of our beliefs about them.
So check the story that you're telling yourself and just try telling yourself a different story.
It's a big part of it, yeah.
Right, and we see this happen a lot of times with people across all ways. I'm not good at math, I'm not good at this, I'm this, and then it's self-fulfilling.
Right.
You said there's also reimagining the trigger, and there was another piece.
Yeah, the task.
Okay.
So this technique is about how do we see the work itself differently. So if we understand that all behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort, well, what do we do when the task itself is uncomfortable, when we don't like doing that work? And I searched and I didn't find any techniques that I really liked that really worked. Some people like to use flow, the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and it's I'm sure you know flow very well, but
like
the problem with flow states is that they're really good for things people already enjoy. Right, an athlete that gets in the zone. Surfing, right? That's fun stuff. How do you get into flow during your taxes? How do you get into flow cutting your grass? You can't. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
Even Csikszentmihalyi says he doesn't give any real advice on how to do that.
And so those would be good examples of tasks that you might not want to do. Cut the grass or do your taxes.
Yeah.
For some people, working out. For some people.
Right.
Okay.
So what do you do? This to me is magic. So I worked with Dr. Ian Bogost, who is at Georgia Tech, and he has this theory that he calls play anything. And he believes that you can learn how to play a task, but play doesn't have to be enjoyable. That the job of play is to divert our attention, not distract. Distraction is about doing things you didn't plan to do. Diversion is a refocusing of attention. And so we can use play under certain conditions to help divert our attention during a task that we otherwise would not enjoy. So he gives the example of cutting his grass. He hated cutting his grass. And so he wanted to figure out, how can I learn to play cutting my grass? And he gives us 2 ways to do this. He says the first step is to add constraints, right? So how quickly can I cut the grass? How can I cut the grass with the least number of turns? Add constraints to the condition, like a sandbox, right? Kids like playing in a sandbox, not because the sand is everywhere, but because it's only in the confines of this little box. Right. That's what makes that experience fun. The second thing that we can do to learn how to play anything is to look for the variability. So he advises us against what a lot of people preach, which is using an extrinsic reward, right? Add a spoonful of sugar. That's what Mary Poppins tells people. Bogus doesn't like that. He thinks that's really bad advice. Because what we do when we add a spoonful of sugar, and we do this a lot, we said, if I work out, I will give myself a smoothie, right? Not only are smoothies horrible for you, but that's a whole other point. The real point here is that if we only use extrinsic rewards, we never learn to enjoy the task itself. Because it's only about the prize, the ribbon, the treat that comes after the reward. And actually, studies find that when people are given these extrinsic motivators, these extrinsic rewards, they're less creative, they're less likely to stick with the task over the long term. So he says, instead of looking for the fun, the play outside, look for it within the experience by focusing more intently, not trying to take your mind off the task, but more focusing on the task itself by looking at the variability. How do you do that? So when Bogus wanted to learn how to play this activity of cutting his grass, he learned everything he could about grass. As crazy as that sounds. The different sod he could use, how he could cut it differently, the fertilizer. He focused more intensely on it so he could find the nuances, the beauty of that task, and that's how he learned to play it. And you say, well, that's crazy. How do you do that? Think about all the stuff that people seem to love that to you would be work. So making coffee, to me, is work. But I have a friend who is crazy obsessed with making that perfect cappuccino. Working on a car. Are you kidding me? To fix a car? You'd have to pay me to do that. I wouldn't do that for free. And yet I have another friend who's a car buff who, in his spare time, loves looking at the variability and the constraints of fixing up his hot rod. My friend who loves crochet. She loves it because the same exact principles. But to me, I mean, that would be work to crochet. So it turns out it's not so crazy that we can actually, by adding the constraints and by looking for the variability, we can learn to play anything.
Yeah, we were actually just talking about David Goggins when we were out at the pull-up bar, and he just did the Moab 240, which is a 240-mile race through like high-altitude desert in America. Again, most people would think that's absolutely crazy, but for him, it's a way to test his own brain and to see what happens.
Yeah.
So he's found a way to kind of make that interesting to him.
Yeah. Well, when I learned to run, I'm not nowhere near his scale, but I used to be clinically obese. Hated exercise. I mean, my friends would tell me about, oh, I love to run because of the runner's high. I had no idea what they're talking about. That was crazy talk to me.
Did you also associate exercise with something you might have to do to not be obese? So there was no good triggers there, right?
It was terrible. It was miserable for me.
People were saying, why don't you exercise?
Yes.
But that's the last thing you want to tell someone who's in a weird
That's exactly right.
loop like that. Okay.
I mean, I had all the negative associations. I mean, when I grew up, I never remember going into the pool without my t-shirt on because I didn't want anyone to see my rolls. And I grew up in Florida where, we had this community pool in my condo complex. There was one pool for the entire neighborhood, and that's what we always did.
Every weekend.
Every day after school, we would be in the pool. And I mean, I just had these terrible associations with my body image. And so, but I decided that, look, to be consistent with my values are defined as the attribute of the person you want to become. And so an attribute of a person I wanted to become was to be the kind of person who values physical fitness. I always wanted to become that kind of person, but I hated exercise. So when I started this journey, I started with running. And I didn't go straight into, okay, let's run a 5K, let's go do a marathon. I wanted to use this principle called AMEA. AMEA stands for minimal enjoyable action. And the idea here is that you learn to appreciate the intrinsic rewards in that behavior. You learn to play anything, essentially. So what did I do? The first thing I told myself was, I'm not doing this for a race. I'm doing this for the rest of my life, right? This is why I hate diets. Diets are temporary. This idea is if you want to eat right, do you want to just, eat right for a month? And what are you going to do after a month, right? This is also, by the way, why I don't like these digital detoxes of, get rid of your phone for 30 days, go on some digital detox plan, because what happens on day 31? You haven't figured out. You've just tested yourself to see if you can make it for 30 days, but then you bounce back with a vengeance. Right. So instead, what I told myself was, Go back to the minimal enjoyable action. The minimal enjoyable action for me was taking a walk. I liked walking, some fresh air, I could make a phone call, I could, just enjoy myself, some free time for myself. So that's what I did. That was my Mia. Now, I do that for a month or two. Then I said, let me see what running for 5 seconds would look like. Literally 5 seconds. But during those 5 seconds, I wanted to find something that was intrinsically pleasurable about that behavior. Now, to me, in my mind, there was nothing fun about running. But I wanted to focus on a sensation, any sensation. That sensation for me was wind through my hair. Through 5 seconds of running, that's what I wanted to focus on. Just that sensation of what does it feel like to go a little faster than walking. Yeah. And so that's what I focused on. And that became a way to focus more intensely on the task. And you know where this goes. The 5 seconds led to a minute led to 5 minutes, and today I can run 4 miles because now I actually enjoy the activity for the first time in my life.
Right. Wow, that's a fascinating way to build that up. And it is fun to go fast, right? Yeah. But most people wouldn't focus on that because they'd be like, oh, I don't want to run. Oh, this is hard, and la, 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 and they would never get going.
Right.
And the reward at the end isn't enough to do it. And posting your time on Strava isn't enough to do it, probably. You need to find something that's intrinsically good about that.
Right. And we fetishize, for some reason, we fetishize the pain. No pain, no gain, right? That's BS. Right? For some people, it's not BS, right? If you want to be a world-class runner, you got to push through, right? You have to do deliberate practice. You have to focus on your faults to really become world class. But most of us aren't world class. We just want to get in a little better shape, right? We're not trying to win any Ironmans per se. So to start that lifelong routine, it's more important to look for the minimal enjoyable action. That's how we change our preferences to start enjoying the behavior.
So I run every Saturday, and when I was training for the Ironman, I was running like a half marathon every Saturday. But for me, I always run it because I know if I don't, towards the end of the day, I'm just not going to be happy with myself. I'm not going to feel as good. And I know when I run, I release. And it's only going to be 28 minutes as I run like a 6K. And so all of those things build up, and I also get to get out of the house and get some spare time, and then I just do it now. Yeah. So it's all these weird narratives that have built up, and now it makes me do it.
What's so interesting in what you just said is that I don't know if did you used to run before?
No, it took me a while to work up to it. Yeah.
So what's interesting is you changed from something that you would avoid because of the pain, now you do to avoid the pain. But in both cases, it's pain. Right? And I was the same way. Yeah. I didn't run because running sucked. It didn't feel good, so I avoided it. Now I run because not running feels bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think you were having this same discussion with Joe DeSena as well, who we both know. And yeah, like for him, like he knows if he doesn't train or doesn't do his 4,000 burpees or whatever that crazy stuff Joe does of a Spartan race, then he does feel bad. And the same with me. I know if I don't train every single day of the week, come the afternoon, I'm going to be anxious and stressful and edgy. And there's only one way of getting rid of that: training. Back in the day, for me, it would be drugs and alcohol, and I know how that doesn't work out, right? That's, again, I'm avoiding that painful situation of being that guy again. Right. So, yeah, your theory is starting to ring true with me. You also said reimagining the trigger. Can you talk about that?
So reimagining the trigger is a little bit what we talked about before in terms of the 10-minute rule. It's reimagining that conversation with yourself. It's noting the sensation. So in the back of my book, there's a distraction tracker because what psychologists tell us that by simply noting that sensation, if you can identify the preceding emotion before you become distracted. So I checked email because I was anxious about what's coming into my workplace. I'm stressed because of XYZ, whatever it might be. If you can just write it down, okay, it turns out that's a step to give us greater agency and control over those emotions. So there's a bunch of techniques that I describe in the book around how we can reimagine the trigger through some of these methods.
What are some common triggers that people listening might experience? A lot of people know they're spending too much time on, say, social media, but they don't know why all the time. And that's kind of natural, right? Like these days, it's so easy to grab that device. And it's not always the device. It could be shopping or drinking or sex or whatever it is to distract you. But sometimes we don't, equate it with what we're feeling. What are some of those common feelings?
Stress, anxiety, uncertainty, fatigue, loneliness. I mean, the list goes on. And of course, we have products that cater to each one of these things, right? So this is back to my first book, Hooked. I mean, this is how products build these habits in our lives, that they cater to these individual triggers. And we want them to, right? By and large, we want to associate a product's use with relieving some of our troubles, right? So that when we need something, we grab our app and we order it on Amazon, or when we want entertainment, when we want to relieve boredom, there's nothing wrong with watching a game on TV or watching Netflix. It's when we do it on someone else's schedule as opposed to our schedule that's the problem.
Right.
And that's the second step. So until now, we've just been talking about how to master the internal triggers, which is the first and most important step. But remember, we talked about traction and distraction?
Yeah.
So the next step is about making time for traction. And this is incredibly important. This step is really about the fact that if you don't plan your day, something or someone is going to plan it for you. That if you think about how much time we spend protecting our stuff, right? We buy alarm systems for our cars, we have security systems for our homes, we put our money in vaults to protect our things. But when it comes to our time, something that everyone has the same amount of, right? Whether you're Bill Gates or anyone, you have the same amount of 24 hours every single day. Sure, come on over, take as much of it as you want. Because if we don't plan our time, somebody's going to plan it for us. Whether it's your boss, your kids, your spouse, the news, whatever's going on Twitter, we have to start planning our day, because you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Right. By definition, if you have a big white space open calendar, then how do you know anything's a distraction? You didn't plan your day. You don't know what is traction, and so therefore you don't know what is distraction. Everything is a distraction. So this brought me to this technique called time boxing, which is based on a lot of research. For decades now, psychologists have known that this technique that we call making an implementation intention, which is just a fancy way of saying planning what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And this technique is life-changing. It's life-changing in our home life. I mean, it saved my marriage. It's incredibly effective in the workplace as well, because by making that time box calendar, most people do it once a week. It takes 15 minutes a week. It's on my calendar to do this and to reflect upon my previous week's calendar and to compose my next week calendar. Okay. And once you have that template for your week, you're making small adjustments. But the important thing is that you want some kind of template. You want something you can look at, to refer to say, okay, is what I'm doing with my time right now, is it something that's on my calendar, therefore it is traction, or is it anything else? Even the worky, productive-y stuff, like checking email when you plan to work on that big project, if that's not what you plan to do with your time, it is just as much of a distraction. Now, it doesn't all have to be productive work stuff on your calendar.
Right, because some people are going to say, Nir, I can't plan every 30 minutes of my day. I think Bill Gates was famous for every 6 minutes of his day was planned and had meetings for 6 minutes. So you're not saying every 6 minutes has to be full-on active.
No.
But you have to have a plan for it to be a relaxing thing, or you check your email, you're not, or you're with your kids, or maybe nothing's planned for that. But it's planned, but nothing is planned.
Exactly. The time you plan to waste is not wasted time. So whatever is consistent with your values, and I'm not going to tell you what your values should be, whatever is consistent with your values in your life, you've got to make time for it. So if physical health is important to you, where is that on your calendar? It's not just going to happen. You're not just going to spontaneously go to the gym. It has to be on your calendar. You have to make time for it. It's not going to happen. If relationships are important to you, one of the reasons we are suffering through this epidemic of loneliness is that many of our civil institutions that provided a regularly scheduled way to interact with our friends, civic groups, Kiwanis, bowling leagues. Robert Putnam, by the way, talked about this in the 1990s, well before social media. Social media did not cause this. This has been a long process. Spurred on by the secularization of the West. Many people don't go to church like they used to, so they don't have that regular place on their calendar to interact with friends. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying people have to go join a religious group per se, but I do think if interacting with people you love is important to you in your life, you have got to put that time in your calendar. We have to stop telling each other, yeah, let's get coffee someday. No, if your friends are important to you, that has to have a place on your calendar as well. And we can describe some various techniques to do that. And then, of course, when it comes to our workplace, so many of us are reacting all day long. Between emails and Slack channels and meeting, we're just constantly reacting. Where's the time for reflection? Right? We have succumbed, we have given up the time we spend on things that are important, and instead all we do is the stuff that seems urgent in the moment. But without focusing on the strategic stuff, time to think, time to focus, how do we plan our futures? We can't. We need that in our day. So that has to be planned for as well. And then what we're doing is we're synchronizing our calendars. So it's not good enough just to put that time on your calendar. What we also have to do is to sit down with the stakeholders in our life. So we sit down with our boss and we say, hey, look, boss, here's my calendar for the week. Here's all the priorities you gave me. Here's the stuff I couldn't fit in. What should I reprioritize? And this is incredibly important because, managers today, they're so scared of micromanaging people that they don't ask them to try this technique. And so what they do is they just throw tasks to their employees, right? I want you to do this, I want you to do this. So that's all output, but they don't consider the input. If I went to a baker and I said, okay, I need 100 loaves of bread, he'll say, no problem. Where's the flour? Where's the yeast? Where's the sugar? Where's the salt? I need the input in order to make the output. But when it comes to knowledge workers who work in an office, managers just throw over tasks without considering the one input, which is our time. And so this schedule sync with our boss, with our domestic partners, so with my wife, we do this weekly. And this saved my marriage.
Explain how this saved your marriage,
Yeah.
because this will be powerful for people.
So my wife and I, we've been married now for 18 years.
Okay.
And a few years ago, we would constantly get in these fights, that we would have these disagreements around household responsibilities. And she was complaining that I wasn't doing enough around the house. And my response was, honey, I'm not a mind reader. If you want me to do something, just tell me.
Which is a common comment.
You felt
by
this
men.
before, okay.
Yes, which is obviously a cop-out. So go ahead.
Right, so what I didn't realize was that asking her to tell me what to do was itself asking her to do work. I was asking her to be my boss. And that's work. That takes effort. And it turns out the more I researched this topic, I found that this is very common, that in fact, studies have found that even in dual income heterosexual households, women today still take on a disproportionate share of household admin duties, unfortunately. When I give this talk in front of crowds, I always see women in the rooms, heads, oh yes, yes, and the men are saying, no. That happens all the time. So what did we do? We would have these hours of fights over the years about this topic, and it really pulled us apart. So what did we do? We used this time boxing technique. We sat down, we wrote down the stuff that needs to happen on a weekly basis, and we didn't just stop with a to-do list. A lot of people have the honey-do list, right? I want you to do all these tasks. That's not good enough, because remember, that's only output. It's not input. The input is, when are you going to do those things?
Right.
And so now we sit down every week. She has her time box calendar. I have my time box calendar. And we do this schedule sync. And we say, okay, you're going to take our daughter to class this day. I need the car that day. You do this, you do that. Great. It takes 15 minutes. It saves us countless hours in the fights we used to have.
Right. So and now she knows you're doing it. She can see you're going to do it. And now you don't have to wait for her to try to tell you and remind you, and everyone can see it, and then it happens.
Exactly.
And you're accountable.
Because there's so many contingencies, right? So many times, if I don't do one thing, then if I don't collect the trash, then she can't take it out, right? So I know when that's going to happen. So for example, I do the meal prep in my household. Eating healthy is one of our values. And so we meal prep once a week so that my daughter and my wife and I have healthy food for the week. But if I don't cook that food on Saturday, she can't serve it later on in the week. So now we know exactly when those things are going to happen, and it has solved so many of our problems.
Yeah, you and everybody has problems with this. So, and I still don't do enough around the house. I'll just say that right now to whoever's listening, including my wife. But when there were scheduled times in the past where I was doing things for the family, it was very helpful. So I used to take my stepdaughter to jiu-jitsu lessons every Saturday morning. We would get up, rain, sleet, or shine, and we would be out for 3 hours jiu-jitsu, and we'd always go for lunch afterwards. And that was just something to schedule. Now, Sundays, I'm always taking my boys out on Sunday for those couple hours. And I can feel that from my wife, it's important that we do it no matter what. And it's just like, it's something that's helpful for her, knowing that, okay, the kids are gone, she can do her thing, because it's for her a time box as well. So now she's got her break, she can take her shower, she can do whatever, and it definitely helps us.
I also want to emphasize, I'm not saying that you can't plan time for fun, by the way. I mean, you said it like, so on weekends, for example, I have 3 hours of time with my daughter that is planned spontaneity. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it's planned spontaneity. That time is for my daughter and nobody else. What we do with it, I don't care. We can be spontaneous with that time. That's totally fine. So I'm not saying everything in your day has to be work stuff, but if you value meditation, if you value journaling, if you value whatever it is that you want to do with your time, plan that time. It sounds intimidating, folks. It's really simple. It takes you maybe 30 minutes to do the first time. You do it 15 minutes a week to plan that week ahead and to ask yourself, how can I make my calendar easier to follow? That's what I want you to do in this repeated cycle, is to look at the week ahead and to figure out how it can be made better. So this is an iterative process. Becoming indistractable is not something you ever become. You're never done becoming indistractable, just like you're never done becoming a creative person, right? It's an iterative process that if you can build that skill set, it helps you in many different facets of your life.
So action step right now would be for people to fire up their Google Calendar or whatever calendar. If they haven't used it in a while, this is not a good sign. If you have used it, but maybe it's just for a meeting here and there, maybe for the purpose of this, Nir told you to do it, overdo it, and just go ahead and put for every hour of the day, even if it means Netflix and chill time, oversleeping time, whatever, but plan every hour out, just as an exercise.
Yeah.
And that way you can know if you're being in traction or distracted.
Exactly. And I actually built a tool because a lot of folks complained that Google made this too difficult to adjust your times, and I agree. So I made a special tool, totally free. You don't even have to log in. I'll give you the link for the show notes.
Okay.
That anyone can use. Make their calendar. It saves it there, and then you can look at it and keep it open in a tab, print it out perhaps, just so you finally know what is traction versus what is distraction.
Okay, that's super helpful. All right, I just want to make sure we're doing this all right. So we're covering traction, distraction, and then the internal and the external triggers. Have we defined traction and distraction enough here?
Yeah, so we've done the first two steps. So mastering the internal triggers, making time for traction. The next step is to hack back the external triggers. So remember we talked about those two triggers that move us towards traction or distraction, the internal triggers and the external triggers. And there's nothing necessarily bad about these external triggers, right? An external trigger that prompts you to do something you plan to do is wonderful, right? I need my alarm clock to remind me it's time to hit the gym, right? I need that.
Yeah.
So they can be very useful. The question that I think a lot of people don't ask themselves is this one, that is this external trigger serving me or am I serving it? Because the fact of the matter is, look, I can tell you as an industry insider, we know these tech products are designed to hack our attention. But that doesn't mean we can't hack back. There are thousands of free tools that we can use to hack this technology to make it serve us as opposed to us serving it.
Yeah.
So simple things like changing your notification settings. 2/3 of people with a smartphone never change their notification settings. Really? Can we call technology addictive and hijacking our brains when we haven't taken 5 minutes to change the notification settings? That's kindergarten stuff. That's basic. I only spent about a page on that in the book.
Right. But I think most people maybe they claim they don't know, but they should know. But you can go into your device and change all the notification settings, the badges, the beeps, the dings, the buzzes. What do you call it? Dings, pings, and rings.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can go in there and disable that stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and we don't need all that stuff. Do you really need breaking news all day long to interrupt you with these notifications, with these badges? Why?
I would argue you don't need any news. But
and guess what? If you turn off Facebook, or even better, maybe uninstall it from your phone. So I love Facebook. I use it every day, but I use it on my schedule. There's literally time in my schedule for social media time, right? And so I don't need it on my phone. I use it at home on my desktop, not on my phone. I don't need it interrupting me.
Which is a great hack, putting these things on your desktop.
Yeah.
Instagram on the desktop is really good as well because it's very addictive and easy on the phone, but if it's on your desktop, you kind of have to be intentional about it, right?
And the reason this is so powerful is twofold. One, you're not constantly tempted to use it throughout the day, right? Because Facebook is not on my phone, I'm not tempted to use it all the time. But two, it relieves that internal trigger, because we have this sensation of, ooh, if I don't check soon, maybe I'm missing something. When am I going to check it? When am I going to check it? Instead, I know exactly when I'm going to check it. It's on my calendar. It's time boxed. So that stress of, when am I going to have this time doesn't linger over me anymore. I know it's coming. Nothing to worry about. Time will come. And this is incredibly helpful with email as well. So many of us, we are checking email because of the fear that we are missing out on something.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's be honest. Email is someone else's agenda for your time. If you want to write an email, you can go ahead and write one on your notes on your phone, but email is almost always someone else's agenda for your time.
And we can also, the beauty, I'm no Luddite, I love technology, and the beautiful thing is what we see happening is that the second generation of technology is fixing the bad aspects of the first generation of technology. This reminds me of a quote by Paul Virilio, the philosopher. He said, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. And that's exactly what happens, right? When was the last time we've heard about a shipwreck? Almost never. Why? Because ships got a lot better. Right. We didn't stop using ships, right? We made them better. And so that's exactly what's happening with our technology. We shouldn't stop using these tools. They're wonderful. There's nothing wrong with them. We have to change the technology, adopt these new technologies that fix the last generation, as well as adapt our behaviors to make sure that we use them appropriately.
And we're seeing that now. I mean, I get notified on Instagram now when I'm 30 minutes in. We see screen time. I can't tell if they really want me to stop, but we're seeing them trying to do that. Any other ways that we can hack back?
Sure. So where do we start? So I talk about all these different environments, like hacking back email, hacking back group chat, hacking back meetings. Oh my God, what a terrible waste of time most meetings are. Hacking back the open office floor plan. This is a huge huge source of distraction. So
Yeah, we have one here.
Okay.
You saw it. It's dangerous sometimes.
So it turns out
somebody from our video team the other day put out a message in Slack, which
Yeah.
of course is another problem for hacking. And they said, because we're working on one of our documentary films, and they said, please do not distract the video team because we have a deadline, we have a screening tonight. So please do not come over and have meaningless conversations to us.
Yes.
So like that was a perfect.
I got an
symbol.
even better solution. For you.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So this solution I developed after I read a study about one of the leading causes of death in the United States. One of the leading causes of death, believe it or not, about 200,000 people a year are harmed by medication errors. Nurses giving patients the wrong medication or the wrong dosage of medication inside hospitals. Hundreds of thousands of people are affected every year by this. Wow. Most hospitals believe, it's just a fact of life. What are you going to do? Until a group of nurses at UCSF decided to tackle this problem and figure out why all these mistakes were happening. And it turns out the cause was distraction. That on average, when a nurse was dosing out their medication to the patients, they were distracted on average 10 times per dosing round. And the tragedy here is that the nurse...
chit-chat, someone coming over and talking to them or whatever. Okay.
Another nurse, a colleague, a doctor, a patient would interrupt them during their dosing rounds.
Wow.
And the tragedy here is that the nurses didn't even realize they were making these mistakes until it was too late. Right? They thought they were doing a great job. Until later they said, oh my goodness, what did I just do? I could have killed somebody. Many times they did kill people because of this. So what did they do about this? What was the solution to this problem? These nurses who studied this problem found a solution that reduced prescription mistakes by 88%. 88%, they almost eliminated this problem. And the solution was not some multi-million-dollar program, it wasn't some fancy app or new technology. The solution was plastic vests. These sleeveless plastic disposable vests they wore that said, drug round in progress, do not disturb, said on the front and back. This almost eliminated the problem. So what's the metaphor here for us as knowledge workers? Number one, just like those nurses who didn't realize they were making these mistakes, we do the same thing. We think we're doing a great job at work. We think everything's fine. Just like those nurses didn't realize the mistakes they were making. We don't realize how much better our performance could be if we worked in an indistractable fashion. The second lesson here is that we can do something very simple to hack back the open floor plan office. It's not going away. It saves us a ton of money to not have to give, for every company to give every office worker their own private office. Not going to happen. What we can do, however, is hack back the environment. How do we do that? Every copy of Indistractable comes with a screen sign. It's a piece of cardstock that's in the book. You rip it out of the book, you fold it into thirds, and you place it on your computer monitor. It says, it's a bright red sign with a stoplight on it, and it says, I'm indistractable, please come back later. I'm not saying leave it on your monitor all day, but for 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, however much time you need to do your focused work that you should have time boxed, that's when we let our colleagues know, hey, sorry, I can't be interrupted right now, I'll get back to you later. Very simple, very effective.
Super powerful. I'm gonna get the red vest for everybody.
There you go.
No, for sure. And I think it's hard. You'd say that to people and they'd be like, that sounds really crazy and draconian and all that. But like how much of what we're doing just gets interrupted all the time with those mini distractions. They're like, oh, I just had one quick thing to ask you. But there's studies that show you need another 15 or 20 minutes to get back in the flow of what you were doing.
That's right. Right. Even when we don't feel it, right? We think we're doing great. And about this point, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, when they read this stuff or they listen to me and they say, whoa, that sounds like a lot of work. That's kind of weird. What if my colleagues, don't like it, et cetera? I was talking to a friend of mine who is a smoker, and maybe Rory Sutherland at Ogilvy.
Yeah, we had him here a few months ago.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
he loves that vape pipe, man.
Yes,
he's always puffing on that
sure
thing.
does.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how we've been here before, right? That when I was growing up, I grew up in the 1980s, and I remember in my household, my parents had ashtrays in the house. All over the house, we had ashtrays. My mom never smoked. My dad quit smoking years before. Why do we have these ashtrays? Because back in the 1980s, if you came over to someone's house, you expected to just light up in their living room. Can you imagine what would happen if someone came over to your house and just lit up a cigarette? That'd be ridiculous, right? You kick them out.
Yeah.
How did that happen? You say, okay, well, legislation made it smoking less palatable. Well, that's not exactly true. There's never been any law that said you can't smoke in someone's home. So what changed? What changed is called a social antibody. Paul Graham coined this term, a social antibody, meaning people societies, when they see a behavior that doesn't benefit the society, that harms the society, they change their norms. They change our behaviors of what's acceptable. So just like we did with cigarettes, we see this behavior of using a phone in a setting in a social setting, in a meeting, interrupting people. This is already happening. And I think it's okay that we facilitate that process. So we need the early adopters. We need the people who are change agents who say, I am indistractable. I am the kind of person who, yes, I do some weird things. I don't respond to emails within 30 seconds. I put this screen sign on my monitor, right? But this is who I am. I am indistractable in order to make this acceptable so that in hopefully a few more years, just like how we went from smoking being acceptable to now being unacceptable. And at first, what Rory told me, he said, back in the 80s, if you walked into somebody's home and they said, please don't smoke here, that person was weird. That person was the pariah. That's the kind of person who, oh, what's this weirdo telling me not to smoke? And we're going to go through the same exact process when it comes to our gadgets. The early adopters are already doing this stuff. They're becoming indistractable. And by spreading these social antibodies, this is how we get better.
Yeah, I love it. I'm all for spreading those things. And we see people doing it. People go out to dinner now and they stack the phones on the table to where nobody can pull them out. If I'm ever with someone and they pull out their phone, I will not be hanging out with them ever again.
Right.
I'll literally say something. I'll be like, excuse me, like my time's really important.
Yeah.
And, it's amazing.
You want me to give you something to say that's...
yeah, go ahead, tell me.
Yeah, so there's a section on how to build indistractable relationships. And we see this problem all the time. Somebody's around the table and they're using their device and it's maddening. There's actually a term for it now. It's called phubbing, phone snubbing.
Oh, really? Phubbing?
Yeah, phubbing. It's a new word that was invented actually a few years ago.
It's a crazy thing.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine if someone pulled out something else and started doing it, but if a phone, it's okay. But what if they?
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
So here's what you do. The problem is if you're too direct, then you can offend people. And we have to understand too that we may not know what's going on that other side of the screen. What if it's really an emergency? So there's one question we can ask that politely nudges people to do the right thing with giving them an out if it really is an emergency. And this question is, I see you're on your phone, is everything okay? And but with real curiosity, because you don't know, there might be something terrible happening on the other end of that phone where they need to respond to right away. They'll either say, I'm really sorry, this thing is happening right now, my kid is sick, something is happening, I need to take care of it, and they'll leave the table and take care of it. Or 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh, you know what, you're right, let me just put that away. So this is how we begin to spread these social antibodies.
Right, okay, good, I like that, we can use that.
Is everything okay?
Is everything okay, yeah. And look, I've been using weird versions of this for a long time. I remember when I first read Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek, he had something called an email diet. And I started checking my email like once a day or never before noon. He has something called maker mode and manager mode. We used to do that here where we all lock into maker mode and we try to create something for a few hours as opposed to reacting to what's out there. So yeah, I think it's important that really people put it in these places. All right, have we covered those basics of the traction, distraction, internal, external?
Yep, we did 3 out of the 4. You want to do the 4th?
Yeah, let's do that.
So we did, first one is mastering the internal triggers. The second one is making time for traction. The third step is to hack back the external triggers. And of course, we didn't go into the details of how to hack back group chat and email. There's lots more to discuss, but for the sake of time, let's talk about the 4th step, which is to prevent distraction with pacts. So hacking back the external triggers is about keeping the triggers out. This is about keeping yourself in. And this is an ancient technique. The first recorded case of someone using a pre-commitment is in the story of Ulysses, written by Homer 2,500 years ago. Ulysses is this Greek hero. He has to sail his ship past the island of the Sirens. The Sirens are these mythical creatures who sing this magical song. Anyone who hears it becomes entranced and crashes their ship onto the island of the Sirens.
I'd love to hear that song.
Yeah. What is that?
What is it? What are they saying? Okay, but I remember
Taylor
this.
Swift. I'm thinking. I'm not really sure.
Right,
but.
and I remember there was a movie where they did this, and they had the guy, and he was lashed to the boat, and he had to stick. I don't know. It was
Exactly. So this is what Ulysses does. He makes what we now know as a Ulysses pact. He plans ahead. He makes a pre-commitment. What does he do? He tells his crew, put beeswax in your ears so you can't hear the siren song, and tie me to the mast of the ship. And no matter what I do, no matter what I say, do not let me go. And it works. He can sail his ship right past the Sirens Island.
So he experiences it, but he doesn't go off course in his mission.
He knows he might get distracted, and he plans ahead. So here's the thing. If there's one mantra that I want people to remember, write this down somewhere. I don't care if you buy the book, but remember this. The antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. The antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. If the chocolate cake is on the fork on its way to your mouth, it's too late. If the cigarette is lit and you're about to take a puff, you're going to give in. If you're sleeping next to your cell phone, equidistant from your lover, they're going to get you. You've lost. The key here doesn't matter how delicious the chocolate cake, how enticing the cigarette, how amazing Facebook's algorithms are, or whatever technology might distract you. Fundamentally, there is no distraction that we can't overcome through forethought. A gift of our species that we can do better than any other animal on the face of the earth is that we can see the future with greater fidelity. We can predict what is going to happen like no other creature on earth. And we can use that to our benefit. We can plan today to make sure we don't get distracted tomorrow, just like Ulysses did. So there are 3 types of pacts. We have effort pacts, price pacts, and identity pacts. An effort pact is when you put some bit of friction between you and the thing you don't want to do. So for example, as I mentioned, my wife and I have been married for 18 years. A few years ago, our sex life was really suffering. We just did not have time to be intimate with each other. Why? Because every night we were going to bed, I was playing with my iPhone and she was fondling her iPad. And so we weren't being intimate. And we kept going, not only was this affecting our sex life, it was affecting our sleep. You know, we would go to sleep later and later every night. So what did I do? I made a I made an effort pact. I went to the hardware store and I bought an outlet timer. And this outlet timer you can set for any time of day or night, and whatever you plug into it will turn on and off based on when you set it for. In my household, every night at 10 p.m., my internet router shuts off. Now, could I turn it back on? Of course I could. I could go fumble with it, unplug it, replug it, and turn it back on. Right. But I've inserted some effort in between me and something I don't want to do. Today, actually, there's routers that are built in with this, so you can leave the smart devices on and just turn on, my daughter's iPad and our iPhone. We can turn off the internet on certain devices specifically. So that's an effort pact, making that behavior more difficult to do. A price pact is when we have some kind of cost, some kind of monetary disincentive to not doing the thing we don't want to do. And this research came from a smoking cessation study. In fact, the most effective smoking cessation study in history. They had 3 groups. Group 1, they let them have as much information about smoking cessation, the latest techniques, cigarette patches, or nicotine patches, nicotine gum, any of the conventional techniques they wanted. That was Group A. Group B, they said, if you don't smoke for 6 months, and they did periodic urine tests to confirm this, if you don't smoke for 6 months, we will give you a prize of $800. Now, Group B did much better than Group A. Okay, for addictive as nicotine is, hey, a little bit of money got a lot of people to stop smoking. But here's the interesting thing. What happened in Group C? In Group C, they said, if you don't smoke for 6 months, we will give you $650 as a prize. But to be in this program, you have to put up $150, which you will receive back if you don't smoke. If you smoke, you lose your $150. Now, think about it. The prize was less, right? The amount you won was only $650 versus the $800 in Group B. This group that group reduced their smoking by 7 times the Group B. They were 7 times more effective at smoking cessation than Group B. So this idea of putting up some kind of price pact, some kind of commitment that if you don't do what you say you're going to do, there's a monetary disincentive to not doing it, is very effective. So
people don't want to lose that thing. Probably goes way back to
loss aversion.
Yeah, loss aversion back when that could kill you back in the day, right? You lose your food or you lose your this or
right.
Okay, yeah.
We enjoy winning less than we hate losing.
Yeah, I call it pay price to action, and I see it in my academy all the time. When the students have paid $3,000 for something, they show up and they do the work because they don't want to think, wow, I've lost that money.
That's right.
But when I charge $300 for something, the drop-off is ridiculous. Like these people just disappear.
Yeah.
It's a weird human incentive. But 7 times,
yeah.
Wow.
So here's how I use this in my own life.
Okay.
So every morning, as I mentioned, I hated exercise for years and years. Every morning when I wake up, the first thing I see when I get dressed is this calendar I have on the wall. And on the calendar is taped a $100 bill, fresh, crisp $100 bill. Above the calendar is a Bic lighter. And this is called the burn or burn technique. I have 2 choices to make every day. I can either go to the gym, burn some calories, do some push-ups, take a walk, do something physical, or burn that $100 bill. It's been 3.5 years. I've never burned the $100 bill. Why? because the disincentive of having to burn that money right there says, fine, I'll just do some push-ups, I'll go take a walk, I'll go to the gym. Today, actually, I don't even need that anymore because now, with the other techniques we described earlier, now I intrinsically like going to work out.
Right.
But that technique of using a monetary disincentive to help me stay on track is a wonderful price pact.
It's not only that, you'd actually literally have to light it yourself and watch that money burn.
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying everybody needs to do this.
Right.
I'm not saying you need to do it as much as I'm doing it. It's the principle. What I want to teach people are the strategies. The tactics are less important. Strategy is tactics are what you do. Strategy is why you do it. So I want to teach these basic 4 principles, and then you can use them and mix and match them any way you want to come up with a solution for you in your life based on your values, not mine.
Yeah, that's powerful. All right, was there a third one?
Yeah, so the identity pact. And to me, this is the most interesting of the 3.
Yeah.
Identity pacts actually comes from the research into the psychology of religion. I'm not a fan of self-discipline, self-control, willpower. Those things tend to be overused. We only want to use self-discipline and self-control if we really have run out of every other technique. And as someone who was clinically obese and always struggled with these problems of distraction my whole life until I got into this field, I hated when people say, oh, just have more self-discipline or just tough it out. That stuff doesn't work. What you need is a system, and what you need is an identity. So it turns out that when you look at the psychology of religion, what we find is that people who have some kind of moniker, that they see themselves in a certain way, are much more likely to stay on track. So there's a joke that goes, how do you know someone's a vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you. And not to pick on vegans. I mean, you can substitute.
I used to tell that joke.
Okay.
To vegans.
Yeah, there you go, right?
Didn't go over so well.
You can substitute CrossFit or
Yes.
keto. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Why do people do this? Because there's something about that moniker, right? Every religion, every major religion, has people who proselytize, who evangelize. Why? Is it just about spreading the faith? No. When you have a moniker, when you have an identity, and you tell others about it, it solidifies your identity. It makes you more likely to stay on the path. And what's so important about these monikers, if you think about like a devout Muslim, okay? A devout Muslim does not say to themselves, ooh, should I have that gin and tonic? No, a devout Muslim does not drink alcohol. It's who they are, it's their identity. A vegetarian doesn't say, that bacon looks good, I wonder if I should have some. No, a vegetarian does not eat meat. They do not have to use a lot of self-discipline and self-control. It's who they are. Right. And this is why the book is titled Indistractable. This is our new moniker. This is our new identity. And is it any weirder or stranger than someone who might wear religious garb that's not common, or someone who eats in a way that's not common? No. This can be our identity. This can be who we are. And we should proudly declare that we are the kind of people who do what we say we're going to do. We are indistractable.
That's super powerful. And that's different than like Stoicism. You're saying that's more of kind of treating the problem or more of a mindset, and this is really the strategies.
Right. Yeah, I think that, there's lots of techniques that work out there that we've seen over the years. I think Stoicism is particularly helpful when it comes to that very first step around how do we cope with discomfort. As is meditation. I don't talk about meditation anywhere in the book other than to say I'm not going to talk about meditation. Many of these techniques are effective, but I don't talk about them because they've been talked about ad nauseum. Right? Do we need another book about meditation? It's great if it works for you. Keep doing it if you like it. Stoicism is working for you. Wonderful. Keep doing it. I was looking for more. I was looking for other techniques because I think it's really about the confluence of these 4 factors. The really hard part in writing this book was trying to figure out what to leave out, right? I wanted to boil down this research into the 4 most fundamental elements of traction, distraction, external triggers, internal triggers. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to teach your kids. That's all you need to share with others. These 4 basic steps. But of course, you can insert other tactics that help you support those strategies. So if Stoicism helps you with coping with internal triggers, wonderful. If meditation helps you with that, wonderful. If you find new ways to hack back or to prevent distraction with pacts, do it. The strategy is more important than the tactics.
Right. Which makes me ask the next question is, what took you so long to write the second book?
To be honest, I kept getting distracted. When I started, here's the thing, when I wrote Hooked, nobody was calling me, right? I hadn't published a book yet.
Right.
Nobody was booking me for speaking engagements or for consulting work. It was just me. And ironically, when the book came out and Hooked did as well as it did, that's when I started getting more calls, more emails. So I had more temptation to get distracted. And that's a big part of it, that the thing that had made me successful, writing, became something that was very difficult to get done. And so that's why I wrote this book. I write books when I need a solution. I mean, I was patient zero. I wanted to figure out how to fix my distractibility. And so that's why I wrote this book. I read everybody else's book on this topic, and none of those solutions worked for me. Right? Giving up your technology, and the books that tell you how technology is hijacking your brain and the solution is to give it up, it doesn't work. One, it's not going away, and two, they're wonderful tools. I don't want to give up these technologies. They're amazing. I mean, think about all the impact. I mean, particularly us, right? When we use the internet to reach people who otherwise would not get this message. I love these tools.
Yeah.
The idea here is to use them in a way where we are getting the best out of the technologies without letting them get the best of us. I hate this fear-mongering and this narrative that the popular media likes to portray that, ironically, they do because it gets a lot of clicks. Right? I mean, they're in the same business that Facebook is in. You know, when a newspaper talks about how addictive and hijacking your brain these technologies are, guess how they make their money? They're also attention merchants. They're also selling your attention the same exact way. I think news is one of the most distracting ways you could potentially spend your time. Not that there's anything wrong with the news, as long, again, as you consume it on your schedule, not on someone else's.
Yeah, yeah. And how did you get into Hooked? I mean, you were what, at Stanford, and you were working in the early days in kind of Facebook and the advertisement there, and then you were looking at what you were doing. I was just curious, how did that book come across?
Yeah, so my second company was in the advertising and gaming space. Okay. And I had this front row seat watching these companies be built and really hit their stride. And when my company was acquired, I had this hypothesis that habits would become more important. That as the interface shrinks, that as we went from desktops to laptops to mobile devices to wearable devices, and now with auditory devices like Amazon Alexa, the real estate to trigger people with external triggers would disappear, right? Just less room to trigger people with external triggers, which would mean that if your product is not something that people use habitually, you might not as well even exist. Right? If you're not on the home screen of someone's phone, if you're not top of mind as an Alexa skill so people can ask for it, they're going to forget about you. And so habits are a huge competitive advantage. And so my idea was, you know, how do you build habit-forming products? How do you build the kind of products that are used as much as, you know, people use Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack? What if we could use those same methods in all sorts of products? And that's exactly what's happened in the past 5 years since I published Hooked. You know, companies like Kahoot is the world's largest educational software. Gets kids hooked to in-classroom learning. Byte Foods gets people hooked to eating healthier food options. A company I profile in this, we just published the second edition of Hooked, Fitbod, gets people hooked to exercising in the gym. So that's really the why I wrote this book. Google and Facebook, the video game companies, they've known these techniques forever. That's not who's buying my book. Who's buying my book, who's utilizing it, are the companies that want to build the kind of products that help people, that improve their lives, if they would only use the product. And so that's really my target audience.
Right, and that 4-part model that was super groundbreaking at the time was trigger, action, variable reward, and investments. Right. And I think the variable reward was something that threw me a curveball back in the day, because I was like, well, how is that addictive? And I was just wondering if you could talk us through maybe briefly those 4 parts, and how did you come up with that? Because maybe at the time you were like, oh, this seems normal to me, but it was pretty revolutionary stuff.
Yeah, it is old stuff in that variable rewards is B.F. Skinner, 1940s, 1950s stuff, where he took these pigeons, he put them in a little box, he gave them a disc to peck at, and every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, they would receive a little reward, so he could train the pigeons to peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. By the way, if they didn't have the internal trigger of hunger, the experiment didn't work. Right. So you can't make pigeons or people do stuff they don't want to do. They still have to have that internal trigger, or it doesn't matter what mechanism you give them. If they don't want that thing, if they don't have the internal trigger, they're not going to act. Okay. So the experiment only worked when the pigeons were starved. But what Skinner observed was he could train those pigeons to peck at the disc, kind of like we would train a doggy or something, right? Through operant conditioning. But what he found was, one day he ran out of these food pellets. He didn't have enough of them one day. So he couldn't afford to give a food pellet every time the pigeon pecked at the disc. He could only afford to give it to them once in a while. So sometimes the pigeon would peck at the disc, no reward, no food pellet. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was that the rate of response, the number of times a pigeon pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Why does this happen? Because variability spikes activity in what's called the nucleus accumbens, creating this desirous response, this craving reflex. And so the most common example that we think of with variable rewards is slot machines.
Right,
Vegas.
Vegas.
Exactly. It's the mystery, the uncertainty of what you might find when you play one of these games of chance. But of course, variable rewards are everywhere. Right? It's a big part of what makes something engaging. In Hooked, I talk about persistence hunting, how many people think that we used spears and arrows, firing them at animals from afar. That's totally not how we killed most animals. Our species survived through chasing down our prey. That the reason we are hairless apes is because we are meant to run. Born to Run, and many great books out there that talk about this persistence hunting aspect. That in fact, it's chasing that kudu, chasing that animal, that uncertainty, the unpredictability, the variability of where is that animal going to go next. That's what kept us chasing after that animal for hours and hours. And so in all sorts of experiences today that we find most engaging, most habit forming, the ones that grab our attention most, you find variable rewards.
What else? Tinder?
Of course. Well, romance in general.
Romance.
Even before Tinder. Of course, Tinder
Right.
has swipe left, swipe
Right.
right. Who am I going to see next? What does that person think of me? Lots and lots of variability.
Right.
But romance itself,
Right.
when you first meet someone you're interested in, there's all that variability. Does she like me? What's going to happen? There's all that variability, the mystery. When you've been married to somebody for years and years, the butterflies in the stomach go away, right? There isn't that same feeling. That's totally normal. You like them for other reasons. You fall in love, for other things about them. But that initial enchantment where you just can't stop thinking about them is about variability. The news, right? The first three letters of news, N-E-W. What's new? What's different, right? What don't I know? Movies, right? Why do we watch movies? We want to know what's going to happen at the end. Sports. Why do we watch sports? Watching that little ball bounce around a pitch or a field, what is it? It's nothing more than a slot machine mechanic. It's uncertainty, it's variability. And of course, when it comes to technology, scrolling that feed uses the exact same psychology as pulling on a slot machine.
Right. And I guess life is variable reward as well. If you knew everything that was going to happen to you the rest of your life, it would be a pretty horrible existence.
That's a good point, yeah.
Wow. And so that book got you on the radar of a lot of people. You were asked to speak at a lot of places, start companies, and that's been a lot of your last 5-6 years. Now, I know you moved to New York City. What do you call yourself now? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you an author? Are you a speaker? What are you?
So I originally started writing. I didn't think I was going to become an author. I just wanted to know these answers for myself when it came to how to build habit-forming products. But the more I wrote about this stuff, turned out a lot of other people had questions about this. I started teaching at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, then later at the Design School. Then I published Hooked, and I really enjoyed the speaking and the teaching. And I call myself a behavioral designer, meaning I help companies design behavior using consumer psychology to build healthy habits in people's lives. And now with Indistractable, I'm helping people understand these principles so that they can break the bad habits and do the things that they say they want to do and become indistractable.
Okay. That's more for the consumer. There's not many companies that want to break habits.
Right,
Or
so
are there?
Well, there actually are. We know that distraction, just like those nurses in that study where they had these horrible consequences when they were distracted. I think all of us see this in the modern American workplace. Yeah. We are constantly distracted at work, and there's a whole section in the book about how to build an indistractable workplace. And what's so fascinating about this is that turns out, once again, we love to blame the proximal causes. We love to blame the symptom as opposed to diagnosing the disease. And when it comes to distraction in the workplace, there's actually no correlation with the technology used and the amount of distraction in the workplace. Great example of this is Slack. When I was researching this book, number one most distracting technology was email, which is interesting because it's not new. Email's been around since the 1970s, but people find it very, very distracting. The second most distracting technology that people kept bringing up was Slack or some other group chat app. Slack happens to be the biggest one. And so I went to pay Slack a visit. And I went to Slack headquarters, and I assumed that if the technology was causing the problem of distraction, well, nobody uses Slack more than the people who work at Slack. They should be the most distracted people on earth. But that's not what I found. That in fact, if you use Slack on nights and weekends, you are reprimanded. That is not what they do there. And it turns out that they have this amazing workplace culture that helps them stay focused. And what I discovered was that in reality, the problem of distraction in the workplace is a symptom of dysfunctional company culture. It's not about the technology. A healthy company culture doesn't struggle with this problem of distraction. And Slack happens to be a company that has a fantastic workplace culture. They're consistently rated as one of the best places in America to work, according to their employees. And they exhibit these 3 attributes of a company with a healthy company culture. Number 1, they give employees psychological safety. Psychological safety has been studied extensively. There was a great project at Google that studied this, that found the highest performing case teams at Google were not the smartest people. Right? We always say, hire A players and get the best people in a room. That's going to make a great team. Not true. Google did this. They had a Nobel laureate and a 10x engineer and the best of the best in a room. They did not produce the best results. The teams that produced the best results were the ones that gave employees psychological safety. Psychological safety is the ability to talk about concerns, talk about problems without fear of retribution, without fear of getting fired. It's when people can't talk about their problems, that's the real problem, including the problem with distraction. It's not the tech distraction that's the problem. It's the problem of not being able to talk about the problem.
Okay.
So Slack exhibits that. They encourage this kind of commentary. They want people to have the psychological safety. They don't fire people when they voice concerns. When we look at Boeing with the 787 disaster or Enron, there are always people in the company who knew something wasn't right and they didn't want to speak up because they were afraid they're going to get fired.
Okay.
The second thing they do is they give people a forum, a place to voice their concerns. So at Slack, here's how they do it. They have Slack channels where people can talk about stuff that bothers them at Slack. It's called Beef Tweets. It's a channel where people can post beef about the company.
Okay.
And management will go into that Slack channel and acknowledge that they are doing something about those problems. They'll leave a check mark, the emoji, check mark emoji. They'll use emoji eyes to tell them that I've seen that problem. They don't always fix everything in that channel, but giving people the agency, back to what we talked about earlier about high control, low agency.
Yeah.
When people feel like, oh, my concerns are registered, I have control over the situation, the boss saw what I was talking about and is doing something about it, that gives people a sense of agency and autonomy in doing something about these problems. And then third, and perhaps most importantly, the company executives exemplify what it means to be indistractable. So when I talk to managers at Slack, they told me they don't use their device in the middle of meetings. They want to set that example. That's not what we do here at Slack. When you walk into company headquarters, I couldn't believe this, you will see on the wall of Slack HQ, it says in big pink letters, it says, work hard and go home. I have a picture of it in the book. It says this on the company wall because everybody in the organization, from Stuart Butterfield on down, culture flows downhill. So management on down believes in this principle that to do our best work, we have to be focused while we're at work, and then we have to leave people alone after work.
Right. That should be the tagline for your book.
Isn't it great?
That's the same thing you're saying in your book.
Work hard
and go home. So don't be distracted.
Yeah.
Focus on your work and then focus on your play.
Right.
But don't be distracted by one or the other.
That's exactly right. The trouble is, and I will admit this, that there's only so much you can do yourself, right? If I can teach you how to become indistractable, and that's what the first half of the book is about, is what you can do as an individual, and you should absolutely do those things. But we have to be honest with ourselves too, that we operate in environments, and environments can shape our behavior. If your boss calls you at 8 p.m. on a Friday night, you have to pick it up, right? If you want to keep your job. But do we blame the telephone, the technology that our boss used to call us at 8 p.m.? Or do we blame the fact that he's a jerk and we work at a company with crappy company culture that doesn't acknowledge work hard and go home? Right. And so the real problem, it turns out, again, it's not the technology. It's the fact we can't talk about the problem. If I say to folks, hey, I don't like the fact that I have to work 30 hours out of the office on nights and weekends. That's where I have to get work done. The fact that we can't talk about this problem without people thinking we're lazy or that we're slackers, that is the problem, right? So these companies that give people psychological safety enough to talk about the problem and find solutions for it. This is a problem like any other problem. And it turns out if we can talk about it, if we have a regular forum for it, and if management exemplifies that this is important, that's how we fix it.
Okay, that's super powerful. Is the next book going to be a company culture book?
It might. I think I put enough in this one that it should appeal to companies, I hope. Now look, some companies won't change, right? Some companies, they have this ridiculous idea that giving people psychological safety somehow will do bad stuff. I don't agree. But by the way, I am not advocating for working less. That's not what I'm advocating for. I don't think we should have these laws like they have in France that says, okay, 35 hours, that's it by law. I don't agree with that. If you want to go be an investment banker, if you want to go work at a startup, and you want to work 70, 80 hours a week, go for it. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. What I have a problem with is this bait and switch, right? That between employees and their employers, there's a basic contract. You give me your time and your efforts, I will give you money. But if you get a job that you think is only going to require 40 hours a week, but then you get there and you say, oh, it's 40 hours a week in the office, but I'm expected to do 30, 40 hours a week outside the office and work nights and weekends, that's a trick. That's a bait and switch. And that's not ethical. And so that's what I have a problem with, is this mismatch of expectations.
Okay, gotcha. Do you miss teaching?
I still teach, but I teach groups. I teach private as opposed to in the educational setting.
Okay.
I mean in the university
Do you
setting,
miss being in the university? Or had you've been there quite a while?
Yeah.
10 years?
There's something really wonderful about teaching to an audience that can put your techniques to use right away. So when I teach corporates, and they're trying to make a product that is not engaging into something that is engaging, and then they realize, that's what we've been missing. To see the lights go off is amazing. And when you teach grad students or undergrads, are you teaching towards the test? Is this really important? I've never had to build a product. I don't really know how to apply this. It's nice, it's great, but it's not as satisfying as seeing light bulbs go off.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, and just really quickly back to culture, do you think a company can change their company culture, especially if they have a few hundred people? Because we saw, Uber, everyone's talking about Uber and has this company culture and they get rid of the CEO and blah, blah, blah. But the people say you can't change a culture. It's what created that company over 10 years.
Yeah.
Or you can't change it immediately. It's like steering a big tanker.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It's not easy. It doesn't happen immediately, but it's absolutely possible. And I give a case study in the book of the Boston Consulting Group. And just so happened to be that my first job out of undergrad was at BCG. Okay. BCG is a top 3 consulting firm, along with McKinsey and Bain. Very hard charging culture when I worked there. I worked there back in 2001. And I'll be honest with you, it was a pretty horrible place. I mean, we were always connected. We had BlackBerries rather than iPhones, but we were always on. Very high employee turnover. People didn't last very long. I lasted my 2 years and I got out of there. It was tough. It was a really tough place. Interestingly enough, this same company, a few years after I left, there was a wonderful researcher by the name of Leslie Perlow, who was at Harvard Business School. And she came to the Boston office of the Boston Consulting Group, and she wanted to run a little experiment. She wanted to see what would happen if one case team of just 8 people tried to implement this idea of giving everyone on the team one predictable night off per week. She called it PTO, predictable time off. And at first, people said, she met with George Martin, the head of the office there, and he said, first of all, get your hands off my teams, go to someone else's team. Because he wasn't a believer that this was a good idea. And the response from the team that she finally found to try this experiment on was, we can't do that here. We are an international organization. We are customer service. We're in the customer service business. We have to respond instantaneously to our customers if they need something from us. And she said, okay. Imagine you're a consulting firm, okay? You're a big 3 consulting firm. What if this isn't about you? IBM, Delta Airlines, somebody comes to you and says, hey, here's a challenge. How do we give everyone one night off per week? How do we do this? Don't think about it as your problem. Think about it as a problem that somebody else has. They say, okay, we're consultants. We can do this now. They sat down together. They actually solved this problem very, very quickly. What was interesting, what Perlow's research discovered, that it was the process of opening the discussion about the problem of distraction, about giving people time off, that solved the problem. It was just a discussion. The tactics, again, weren't that important. They could figure it out. They're smart people. Anybody can figure this out. Okay, make sure Jim covers for Janet or whatever else. Use this technique or that technique. That wasn't the important part. It was opening up the conversation. Now, not only did they solve this problem very quickly of predictable time off, amazingly enough, they discovered that once they had the psychological safety, the forum to talk about this problem, that management prioritized this and made it and exemplified what it meant to be indistractable. When they opened up the closet and started looking at all the other things that were going wrong at the company, and people felt the psychological safety to talk about those things without fear of getting fired, the floodgates opened. People were keeping secrets, the unmentionables at every company, right? It's the same thing at a dysfunctional company, just like a dysfunctional family. There are those things we're not supposed to talk about, but that is the real problem, that we're not supposed to talk about them. So when people started to talk about these things without fear that they'd get fired, not only did they reduce employee turnover, they kept employees longer, they found all these ways to improve customer satisfaction. to make a better product for their customers because people felt safe talking about this along with many, many other problems. So it started out as a company with a very high employee turnover rate, one that people did not like working at. From one case team, people saw how much more productive that case team was, how much people wanted to stay on that case team, and they started to roll this out to other case teams. It kind of went viral. And today it's something that's done across the enterprise. And today, Boston Consulting Group is rated on Glassdoor, so it's by their own employees, as one of America's best places to work.
Wow, that's a massive turnaround.
Yeah.
And I know the culture you're talking about. They made some TV show about it with a British actor where it was like all these consultants and they would fly around and, you know, charge their customers exorbitant fees and all this usual stuff. So, so it can't change. Okay, that's really helpful.
Right.
What's a daily habit that for you that's non-negotiable, whether you're traveling or not? What's something you do every day?
A daily habit that is not negotiable. I mean, I think that, the reason I'm hesitating is that I think there's a difference between habits and routines.
Okay.
And I think when most people say habits, and the reason we want to build a habit, I think we're in a little bit of a habit bubble, to be honest. So I'm not trying to avoid the question, but I just want to clarify because words really matter to me.
Yeah.
When most people say they want a habit, what they really say is, I want something that's hard to do and I don't want to put in the hard work. I want a writing habit. I want an exercise habit. But then when they do those things and they figure out they're hard, they get down on themselves. Wait a minute, this was supposed to be easy. Habits are supposed to be effortless. So it's important to make sure we understand what a habit is. The definition of a habit is an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. Unlike a habit, a routine is simply a behavior frequently repeated. Big difference.
Yeah.
So I have certain routines that are very important to me, right? Like exercise, getting good sleep. That's what a big part of time boxing is about, is making sure you have time for those routines. But the expectation that things should be habits is very dangerous. For example, with a writing habit. I don't know how to write with little or no conscious thought. I mean, I'd write gobbledygook. I have to think. It's hard work. When I go to the gym, if it's effortless, I'm not really pushing myself. Now, I would say, okay, so a running habit, when I run, I can zone out. It is effortless. I've gotten to a point in my physical fitness where I can run free, and I'm not like timing myself, I'm not pushing myself to get better. I just want to enjoy with little or no conscious thought. That I could say is a habit. But when I push myself, it's no longer a habit, right? Because I'm working hard. So by definition, is not something done with little or no conscious thought. So I think it's important that a lot of people get tripped up around this. They think, okay, I'm going to start this or that habit, without realizing that every habit starts as a routine, but not every routine can become a habit. Many things will never, ever become a habit. And that's okay. We should just know to expect that certain behaviors, by definition, will never become effortless, will always require hard work. That's just part of the process.
No, and I appreciate you clarifying that as well. And so your non-negotiable routines are, you're active every day, your sleep is really important to you. I mean, there's certain things.
Writing time. So I have time in my calendar. So when I travel, you mentioned travel, context changes our behavior. So I plan ahead for this. I know that when I travel, like, I'm promoting the book right now, so my schedule is determined by my publicist right now. Right. So of course I have to give up on certain routines while I'm away from my home base. But when I'm at home, I'm very strict about my calendar. Now, that doesn't mean I sometimes don't get distracted, right? The definition of becoming indistractable doesn't mean you never get distracted. It means you don't keep getting distracted by the same things again and again. You're the kind of person who strives to do what they say they're going to do. So there's this quote that says that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing expecting different results. So I used to get distracted the same way all the time, right? So the point of becoming indistractable is that you can look at that distraction and say, okay, why did I go off track? There's only 3 reasons: external trigger, internal trigger, or a planning problem. And you stop getting distracted by the same things like a dummy. I used to constantly get distracted by the same things. Now I do something about it. Right? So when I have that time box calendar, when I have my routines that like writing, like exercise, like quality sleep, if I do fall off track, now I know why and I can fix it the next time around.
Yeah, very powerful. If I was to ask 5 of your friends, what is Nir's superpower? What is that one thing that allows you to do all the things that you're able to do? If they had to nail it, what would they say?
Wow. Well, now and I hope it's that I become indistractable. I mean, that's really the superpower I would want. because I think that is a macro skill, right? If you can do that, if you can do whatever it is you say you want to do, that's incredibly powerful. And so that's the skill I'm working to cultivate. I think that if there's another thing I pride myself on that I really enjoy, is the ability to simplify complex concepts, right? I really enjoy teaching something that blew my own mind, right? I love those moments of clarity where you say, wow, I used to look at things this way. I was convinced that that's the way things worked. And now, oh my gosh, they're completely different, especially when it's a non-conventional view. So Benjamin Franklin said that when everyone is thinking the same way, no one is thinking. And I think there are so many things in society that we just don't question. Everybody's thinking the same way, and that's where I have a lot of fun, is explaining these complex concepts in a way that, wow, I see the world differently, and hopefully others enjoy that as well.
Yeah, that's good. What was the best day of your life and the worst day of your life?
Oh my goodness, the best day of my life and the worst day of my life. I need to think about that one. That's a tough one.
What about a best day or a worst day?
So recently we launched the INDISTRACTABLE in New York, and I didn't have a launch party for Hooked because I self-published it, so it kind of happened slowly. But with INDISTRACTABLE, it was a big book launch party, and I'd kind of seen these in movies before, like an author with the published part. And today I don't really get nervous on stage anymore, but I really got nervous at my book launch party because I had people there from high school, from college, from business school, from friends I'd collected over the years, author friends, and just looking out at these folks, as well as just fans of my work and fans of the books come out, and it was that I'll never forget that. Like looking on the stage and looking out and seeing all those folks was just amazing. I really shook me up. It was incredible.
Emotional, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why you love writing, because you can impact so many people.
Not really.
Okay.
I'll be honest, I write books for me.
Okay.
And I love, what I really like about writing is that spark that goes off in my head when I can change my own mind about something and come up with an unconventional result. Most of the ideas I have for a book, I don't write. Probably 1 out of 100 ideas I have that are in some Evernote file somewhere that I don't write anything about, because I read somebody else's book and I said, oh, they've covered it. It's been done. I only write books about the topics that I want fixed for myself. That's what I enjoy writing most. Okay. I write books not because I know the answer. I write books because I want to know the answer, and that process is a lot of fun. I call it following my curiosity. That's why I love to write.
Yeah, it makes for good books too.
And frankly, you can't base, or at least I try not to. It's pretty hard to do, but I don't want to base my success on what other people think of my book. I wrote it for me. It was a success. And this is, by the way, when I advise companies. I do a lot of angel investing, and when I advise entrepreneurs on what kind of businesses they should start, I always tell them, you should not start a company to make a lot of money. If you start a business, if you write a book to make money, you're just bad at math, because the odds are so against you. However, if you build a product because you want the product to exist for yourself, you are the user, you have a massive advantage in business. Because the hardest part about building a great product, I would argue that in the same way writing a book is a product, is knowing your customer, knowing your user. Now, market size is almost impossible to predict, right? I think anybody who tells you, that a Facebook investor back in 2006 knew it would touch 1 in 7 people's lives on the face of the earth, they're lying to you. You can't estimate market size. Very, very difficult to do. So don't even try. What you should do is build a product for yourself, write a book for yourself, and if other people like it too, that's gravy. But if you don't make it financially, worst case scenario, you still won. You still succeeded because you built what you wanted. So I wrote the book I wanted. And if other people find it useful too, wonderful.
Yeah, that's helpful. Worst day?
Worst day. It's difficult to say worst day. It's a really tough question. It's kind of like that question of what do you wish you would have told your younger self? It's
That's coming later.
Okay, yeah. It's almost like in Back to the Future when Marty travels back in time, and if he goes back in time and changes something, then he wouldn't become the person he is today. It's all lessons, right?
Okay.
I've had many difficult days, but that's how you learn. That's how you gain life experience. So I think it's about, again, reimagining, reshaping, rethinking. Not that I haven't had some horrible days in my life. My problems in my marriage, problems in my business. I can tell you a list of days that were very, very challenging, but I think they they helped me get to where I am today. So I'm grateful for those.
Yeah. What scares you?
What scares me recently is how easy untruths can spread. Things that are so simple answers scare me. That scares me. I think we live in a culture that really loves black and white, good versus evil, at the expense of nuance. And the fact of the matter is that the answer to every difficult problem is always the same. The answer is it depends. It depends, right? If it was really simple, we would have had the answer already. And I see that today, I think, with technology, that the media wants to paint good versus evil. Silicon Valley is addicting everyone, and these tech tools are this and that and the other. And that's just not nuance. It's not reality. Reality is so much more interesting. And yet, because we are cognitive misers, because people want to think to themselves, I know the answers, I don't have to do any more thinking for myself, that gets us into a lot of trouble. So simple answers scare me.
Yeah, no, they should. It's really well put as well. What would we be surprised to learn about you, besides the pistol squats and the barefoot running? Or maybe you could talk about that.
What would we be surprised? So, I mean, that is something that we have in common. I think that it's not very conventional, that physical health is very important to us, but I think we both kind of look at it a little differently in terms of how we build physical health. That, to me, it's not about how many push-ups I can do or how much I can bench press or whatever it might be. For me, it's really about the skills that I can build in my body for the rest of my life. I mean, I want to live to be over 100. That's my dream. I don't want to leave this planet. I love it here. And so I want to take care of my body so that I can do what I can do at 41, I can do at 101. And so I'm very much focused on these body weight exercises like handstands. I've been working on getting a handstand right for over a year. Not quite there yet. And pistol squats and muscle ups and these body weight movements, which I guess you are as well.
Yeah, I'm playing with that stuff too. And it's just, it's a long timeline for those. So it takes a certain type of mindset for that, which is kind of fun.
And they all look so easy, right? You see other people doing it and you say, I could totally do that.
Yeah. I know you're a fan of Ido Portal and he has these videos he puts on where he calls them basics. And so for him, a basic is like, a handstand or like a muscle up or these things that will take you years to do. But when his students post them, it's the basics. Which it's kind of always funny. But
and it always looks so simple, right? A handstand. How hard is it to do a handstand? Big deal.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
It is simple, just not easy. And you also barefoot run as well.
Right. So I've been barefoot running for many years. That's actually, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Remember I told you how I like to feel the wind in my hair.
Yeah.
Barefoot running, actually, I started because of the sensual experience of that experience. So that, and I used to get a lot of shin splints and knee injuries, and I don't get those anymore because I barefoot run. And I'm not dogmatic about it. I don't think everyone should do it. I, in particular, whenever I would try and run, not only was I not in cardiovascular shape, I couldn't get into cardiovascular shape because of all these injuries whenever I would try. Probably some of it was because I used to have that mentality of no pain, no gain, and I would accept discomfort and pain where you shouldn't have pain when you run. And so by becoming a barefoot runner, that pain has gone away from me.
Yeah, I just had a guy named Tony Riddle in here who did 800 and some odd miles across the UK in 30 days. It was over 30 miles a day every day.
Wow.
And he talked about that sensory experience that we just don't have anymore of just feeling the environment, which connect us with the world and the environment. And it affects a lot of our decisions that we make about the world. So there's a lot of deep stuff going on there.
Right, and not, I'm sometimes I hate sports metaphors, but there is something here around, using willpower and self-control and self-discipline. Like, you can theoretically run correctly with shoes on, but instead of, you really have to think about it. You have to think, at least for me, I used to heel strike, and so I'd have to think, okay, don't do that, do this. And all that thinking, it's like self-control, it's like self-discipline, it's telling yourself what to do. Whereas if you build a system, if you build an environment, if you take off your shoes, you cannot run incorrectly. You can't heel strike, it hurts.
Right.
And so there's an automatic mechanism there to self-correct.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm gonna look into this more. I'm gonna get some lessons soon.
But if you don't have pain, I don't think everyone should do it necessarily. You need just like I say, look, if you don't feel distracted, right? If you do everything you want to do every day, and you're accomplishing what you say you're going to accomplish, and you don't have a problem with distraction, you don't need to read Indistractable. I struggled with this problem, was looking for a solution, and the same goes with why I started barefoot running. It's not something I'd recommend to everybody, but I would recommend it to folks who perhaps have these injuries that they're looking to overcome.
Yeah, I want to try it just to do it. What keeps you awake at night?
What keeps me awake at night? I'll tell you what used to keep me awake at night. Literally, I used to have pretty bad insomnia, and I would get up every night at almost exactly 4 a.m. and I would toss and turn, and I would not sleep for the rest of the night, and I'd only get maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, and we all know how important it is to get enough rest. And I was really frustrated by this because I did many of the techniques we talked about. I planned my day, right? I put time for rest in my calendar to make sure I was in bed on time, and yet I wasn't getting the rest. Why not? So the more I researched insomnia, I learned that the number one cause of insomnia is rumination about insomnia. Right? It's getting, as I used to do, not for everyone. There are some people where there are some real medical conditions going on, where there is a pathology underlying it. But for many people, for me, it was just rumination. Yeah. It was, if I don't get rest today, then I'm not going to be on my game tomorrow, and I've got that interview to do, and then I've got, if I'm not going to be able to write, and all this is going to happen. Why am I not asleep? Why am I not asleep? That rumination cycle made things a lot worse, kept me up. So instead, I adopted this philosophy of focus on the input, not the output. My job is to give my body the opportunity to rest. That's the input through time, which is very easy. Way before this, I wouldn't even do that. I would keep going to bed whenever I was done with my work, right? Sometimes I'd go to bed at 2 a.m, the next day 10 at night. I would have this very variable schedule, which we know doesn't help sleep. So I made the time to do that. I made the time for the input. But then I had to go another step further because, look, I made the time to sleep, and yet I'm not sleeping. What's going on? It's very similar to how I would sit at my desk, and I'd say, I want that good idea to come about. I need to write that great chapter in my book now. I want, that wonderful article to happen now. I need to be creative now. It doesn't work that way, right? You can plan the input. You can't plan the output. And so I adopted this technique that I describe in the book, where now, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I repeat a simple mantra. And that mantra is, the body gets what the body needs. And by repeating that mantra to myself, I am acknowledging the fact that if my body decided to wake up at 4 a.m., that's not my fault. I gave my body the time for adequate rest. I went to bed on time at 10 a.m. That is 10 p.m. That is what I can control. I control the input. The output, I cannot control. Now, here's the thing. When I started telling that to myself, that the body gets what the body needs, that if I wasn't asleep, it's because my body doesn't need that sleep right now. Yeah. Guess what happened? I started to relax, I stopped ruminating, and I fell back asleep. And so I think it's a very important lesson that we can apply not only when it comes to getting enough sleep, it also is important when it comes to getting creative work done. That, if you don't get into that chair and do that thing you've been procrastinating, if you don't put time in your schedule to do your writing, to do your creative work, to do whatever it is you need to do, it's definitely not going to happen. But you can't predict necessarily, that I'm going to finish that chapter, I'm going to finish that presentation. You can't always control those things. I mean, think about, preparing for a talk, for example. You got to get the numbers from Janet, you got to get the graphics from Bill. There's exogenous factors here. You can't always control that. So today, I don't put goals on my calendar. I don't put finish this thing. I put work on it for an hour. Right. So for me, every day I have 2 hours of writing time. I don't care what the output is. It's about the input. That's the one thing I can control. So control the inputs, not the outputs. That's very powerful. I'm going to say that. So what's the mantra again? The body gets what the body needs. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and by the way, I a lot of the book is I don't want people to think that I'm anti-screens. I think we can, again, get the best of these tools without letting them get the best of us. So while I would not recommend keeping an iPad or anything connected to the internet by your nightstand, when my wife and I, there's no screens in the bedroom, no television in the bedroom. It's a sacred space. Our phones, we charge outside. That's a great way to hack back. Do not sleep next to your cell phone. That's a big mistake. Anything that can drag us down this vortex of content or emails, we want out of our bedrooms. But there is one screen I do keep in my bedroom, and that's my Kindle. And I always have a boring book on it. So that if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can repeat this mantra, the body gets what the body needs. If I'm still up, I say, that's okay. I guess my body doesn't need rest right now. So I take out the Kindle. I always have a book that's mildly interesting but kind of boring. A couple pages in, and I'm back to sleep.
Back to sleep. Yeah. No, that's super helpful, because I struggle from that. Like when I can't sleep, then I get frustrated about that, and I think how much you need it, and it always makes it worse.
Yes.
So that's very helpful.
Yeah, and look, here's what typically happens, and this happens when I travel a lot. I'm in time zones all the time, different time zones all the time. And so it's easy to freak out about that. But then you know what happens when I get back, especially after I started wearing the Oura ring, which you're wearing, but I left mine in New York. Yeah. What's amazing is if I don't get a good sleep for a few nights, if I'm traveling in a different time zone, when I come back, then I can see my body goes straight into deep sleep, right? It makes up for that because the body gets what the body needs. Now, of course, if you don't give your body the adequate input, if you don't give your body time to regain sleep because you're staying up too late, because you didn't plan appropriately, whatever, because you have an external trigger not near your bed that's waking you up in the middle of the night, different story. But as long as you make time for the input, you're going to get the output.
Yeah. Nir, I'm going to ask you a few questions I always ask at the end, and one of them you alluded to earlier. If you could pick up a magic device and call up the 20-year-old Nir, who I guess is an undergrad right now, and give him some advice, based on everything you know, from the books, from your business experience, from your stage experience, well, what would you tell him if you could?
The following success secrets are only available inside the London Real Tribe, where you get exclusive access and insights from our high-performance guests on wealth creation, productivity, leadership, morning routines, health, and well-being. To join our tribe community, go to londonreal.tv/tribe. Now, let's continue with the show.
I'm old enough now where I can give myself that advice sometimes in real time. On that same note, best advice you ever received, but maybe writing advice or other advice that you might have received over the years.
So I think when it comes to writing, I think that rule of following your own curiosity, which is something I have to constantly remind myself, especially because my first book did well, and so now it's very natural when you can see the numbers to try and beat your numbers and get better. But I think in many ways, it misses the point. Again, back to this point of, I write to answer problems that I have, answer questions that I have, and following that curiosity I think is very, very important. That once you lose that curiosity, it's very difficult to regain it, to work just for the sake of fulfilling a writing obligation for someone else's deadline or a topic that you're really not interested in. I think it's boring for the reader if it's boring for the writer.
Yeah. Lastly, to that 20-year-old that's watching us or listening to us out there in the world, advice to them, and it could be based on some of the stuff that they're reading. A lot of times they've been told that they're the I generation, that they've got all these problems and distractions and they're snowflakes and they don't match up to all these other people, the usual thing. What would you tell them, advice to them?
So again, one of these things that everybody thinks that I think is not true is this idea that somehow kids today are messed up and they're snowflakes or they're bad in some way or the other. I think this is a fantastic generation. I mean, they are more socially aware. They are more connected. They're more tech savvy. They can do amazing things. And so I think I'm very optimistic, actually. And it's interesting. When I taught at Stanford, when I first started teaching, I would see my students on their devices a lot, right? In class, after class. And yet the more I taught, the longer I taught, and the more we started developing some of these social antibodies, I actually could see it. I can see it today even in my audiences. People have learned these traits. And in fact, the younger people are, the more they have picked up these social antibodies. They're the first to adopt them. So today when I teach, I see hardly anyone using their phone. And we can see that change happening in real time. Sometimes it's the older generation that has the trouble changing. I remember, so my father, when he grew up, they had one phone in his village. And if that phone rang, you picked it up because it was always long distance and you would sit there with the phone and somebody would go run and get the person who needed to hear the call. So till this day, if his cell phone rings, he has to pick it up. He can't let it go to voicemail, which is ridiculous, right? If my phone rang, I wouldn't pick it up, but that would be incredibly rude. He can't do it. It's so hard for him. Right. And I think when it comes to younger folks, they've already made this transition. They've already picked up some of these rules. So I'm really optimistic about the younger generation. I think they're a step ahead in many ways.
Yeah, me too. Nir, we spent 5.5 years waiting for you to come here, but it was worth it. The IP in here is amazing. So it's called Indistractable. They can get it, I'm guessing, at Amazon or booksellers anywhere around the world. But I mean, this is really next level stuff. And you know, we have an academy here at London Real, and we have something called our Life Accelerator, which is something we do twice a year. And one of the things we do in the first week is I put people on a low media diet, and we get them, you know, to kill all their distractions and all their notifications. And we're treating a lot of the symptoms, but it's nice for you to kind of show that, you know, those are symptoms, and there's still a lot of things internally that just makes us naturally want to be distracted. Right. And I don't know, this is really clear what you put together. I know you spent a lot of time on this, and again, simplifying it is what took all the work, right?
Yes. I mean, that pretty little picture of those 4 parts, I mean, that image of the indistractable model of traction, distraction, external, internal triggers, that took just as much time as writing those words.
Yeah, and I love it. So I think people are really going to get a ton out of this. And just to realize that, again, you can't just point the finger at the device. It's a little lazy, and it's not really taking ownership of your life. But to understand that a lot of that comes from inside, recognize that thing, you can really change the person you are. And by doing so, you'll see that these other old habits you had just kind of melt away. You could literally change the course of your life by becoming indistractable, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Our lives, our kids' lives. We didn't talk about kids. I mean, there's a whole section on how to raise indistractable kids. You know, if you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years. Our kid, the world that our kids will inhabit will be even more distracting. This trend is continuing, right? As products get better, we have more choices, we have more options. Kierkegaard said that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Well, this is what's happening. We have more choice, more freedom, which means we have more anxiety. That's not going away. So it's imperative we teach our kids as well as ourselves how to become indistractable.
Yeah, I mean, it could be the difference between making it or not on this planet. So
yeah, it's a big part of it.
Power stuff. Well, congratulations on this. I know writing can be a very lonely process, so congrats on getting this out. I'm sure it's going to do really well. And come back and see us in London again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Okay?
It's a real pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks.